Chapter 127. It's already the 5th day. I think everyone's patience has its limits. Today Taizion did not use his calm gaze to hide the worry in his heart. He stared directly at Butler Jean before him, reminding the other that it had been a long time since the Bureau of Proclamation had confirmed the status of Su Li's chip, and he still had not received a definite answer. I'm very sorry, young master. Butler Jean also seemed to be unable to believe the answer he had received from the Bureau of Proclamation. After deliberating for a long while, he used a more appropriate method to say, but the Bureau of Proclamation has indeed encountered a problem with the verification of the chip. The identities of the security personnel who died in the gymnasium as well as those military bandits who died have all been confirmed, but it said that, when they were verifying Su Li's chip, a small problem just so happened to appear in the cloud computing program of the central mainframe. What problem? Taizion also felt a trace of surprise. It's not clear. The scientists and staff of the Bureau of Proclamation are not sure either. However, it's said that the fix of this problem is a one-off problem. It will appear every once in a while. Even now, they still haven't been able to figure out the pattern of this problem, said Butler Jean with a smile. It will take about 6 days for the fix to be fixed. By then we'll know where Su Lu is. The good news is, at least we now know that he's still alive. Knowing that Su Lu was still alive, Taizion's mood instantly relaxed. Although he had been shocked by how Su Lu had managed to survive the attack of the mecha and those professional soldiers that day, and was even more puzzled by his subsequent disappearance, Taizion was finally in the mood to deal with matters related to himself. Butler Jean looked at the screen of the phone in his hand and reported in a steady voice, Deputy Minister of National Defense Yang Jingsong has died of an acute heart attack. His body will be cremated today. The Minister of National Defense has nominated Zhou Yingxing to take over the position of Deputy Minister. This has already been approved by the President's Office and the Security Affairs Committee. Taizion closed his eyes and leaned against the sofa. Thinking about the political fluctuations in the distant capital, he gradually calmed down. Zhou Yingxing was promoted from the Deputy Director of Logistics of the Ministry of Defense to Deputy Minister. It was obviously unusual for him to be promoted twice in a row. However, this appointment did not meet with any resistance within the government. It seemed that the political figures in the capital had made a lot of concessions in order to appease the Tai family. However, Lady Tai didn't seem to have any intention of stopping here. At the very least, before this case was fully investigated, the upper echelons of the Federation would inevitably experience countless conflicts and compromises. More people had to pay a painful price. This assassination attempt was really too crazy. If the Tai family didn't make a strong enough response, Taizion, as the only heir, would have a difficult time in the Federation in the future. Just as Taizion was silently thinking about his future, Butler Jean had already finished reporting the most important events in the Federation in the past 2 days. Then the old butler bowed slightly and said, Young master, we have to prepare for the worst. If Mr. Su Lu is really unfortunate enough to pass away, we should at least inform his family. Taizion was silent for a moment before saying, Su Lu once told me that he doesn't have any family left in this world. He doesn't even have many friends. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he smiled bitterly. He's a very pitiful guy. Should we inform Zhang Xiaoming and Shi Qinghai? Butler Jean asked. Regarding Shi Qinghai's identity as a spy, there weren't many people in the Federation who really knew about it. Among them were Taizion and Butler Jean. Taizion was deep in thought. His eyebrows slowly knitted together. Because of these 2 names, he thought of something else. Where did the news of him going to Jian Shui'er's concert come from? Deputy Minister Yang had committed suicide, so the military's lead had long been cut off. His knitted eyebrows suddenly smoothed out, and he said coldly, No need. The Federation Bureau of Investigation's Linhai Field office building was brightly lit. Shi Qinghai, who had smoked 3 cigarettes in a row in the coffee room, walked to the sink and splashed his cheeks with cold water. He felt a little better, pushed open the door, and walked in the direction of the forensics department. For the sake of the reconciliation agreement between Representative Pabre and the anti-government forces, he was the bridge and information channel. In the dozens of days before the new year, he was under heavy pressure and abnormally busy. He was already very tired. The incident at the stadium on the first day of the new year, made the entire field office more nervous than ever. The inside story of this assassination was not known to all Federation officials, but this vicious incident happened in Linhai, so the Linhai field office had to take on a lot of work. Shi Qinghai was responsible for the 4 departments, which actually didn't have much work to do, because until now they hadn't found any connection between this incident and the anti-government forces in District S2. Their main task was to filter the large amount of information that was monitored in Linhai and try to find any clues. However, Shi Qinghai was still very tired because he was worried about someone. Evidence A1-419. Shi Qinghai walked to the outside of the forensics department's warehouse and said to the staff behind the glass wall. At the same time, he handed over an evidence transfer form. The staff member carefully checked the signature on the form and checked the electronic secondary authentication on the internal work network. Then he slowly got up and walked into the warehouse. The staff member didn't know why Section Chief Shi was so interested in this evidence and had asked for it several times. However, this piece of evidence was not very important to the case of the stadium. It was just a modified military electric spike. The real key evidence had been sent to the forensics department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the capital 3 days ago. Shi Qinghai took the military electric spike that was sealed in a vacuum bag, calmly said thank you, and then returned to his office. He closed the office door and began to stare blankly at the military electric spike in the bag. It looked a little rough, but it was cleverly designed. In the Linhai Stadium case, Su Li's existence was intentionally or unintentionally covered up by someone. Even with Shi Qinghai's level, he shouldn't have known that Su Lu had appeared in the stadium. However, Shi Qinghai knew, because at midnight on New Year's Eve, he was happily drinking with Su Lu in the bar. At the same time, he heard Su Lu happily say that he was going to visit Jian Shu'er with the crown prince of the Tai family tomorrow. He was Su Li's friend, no brother. Therefore, he knew a lot about Su Lu, such as Su Li's strong fighting skills, and Su Li's interest and talent in mechanics. He stared at the military electric spike in the bag, and confirmed that Su Lu must have been involved in this matter, and played an important role in it. It was written very clearly in the transcript that this military electric spike had already fired an electric arc once, and it had finally appeared in the throat of a militant. That militant was the deputy captain of the special company of the Linhai garrison. Shi Qinghai's private phone rang. On the other end of the phone came the calm voice of the director of the Linhai HTD Bureau. The director is dead. Shi Qinghai's body stiffened slightly. He knew that the teacher was talking about Director Yang, the current Deputy Minister of Defense. However, this news had already been seen in the news. Moreover, he had no relationship with that high and mighty big shot. At most, he had shaken hands with him at the graduation ceremony. He didn't understand why the teacher had specifically called him. Be careful these days. The director's voice was very calm. I keep feeling that something wrong is happening. Shi Qinghai didn't speak and directly hung up the phone. After a moment of silence, he began to dial Su Li's phone number again. But he still couldn't get through, the call still couldn't get through. Zhang Xiaoming put down the phone in her hand, feeling a little lonely. Walking between the snow trees in the pear garden, she tilted her head and looked at the rooms by the iron gate in confusion. She hadn't seen Su Lu for a few days. She didn't know where this guy had run off to. Although she served Senator Macklin, she didn't know what had happened at the stadium. She only knew that Su Lu had gone to a concert and suddenly disappeared. Could it be that he was charmed by Jian Shu'er and ran to her house to be a gardener? Zhang Xiaoming laughed self-deprecatingly, but the worry in her heart grew heavier and heavier. She suddenly thought of the contents of a gossip newspaper that the girl in the dormitory next door had read 2 days ago. A cold wind blew, and her body suddenly became extremely cold. She suddenly turned and walked toward her dormitory. She wanted to find out what had happened that day. Su Lu was indeed a very lonely person. He had lived to the age of 20 in the Federation, but among the tens of billions of people, only 3 people cared about his life and his safety. Unfortunately, he didn't know the sincerity of these 3 friends at this time, because he was still in a coma. He was dreaming. In the underground parking lot of the Linhai State Stadium, Su Lu fainted in the dark space filled with the smell of burnt flesh, blood, and water. He fell heavily to the ground and fell into a coma. Perhaps it was because he had overexerted the power in his body, Or perhaps it was because the warm current in his body had caused some damage to the camouflage chip behind his neck. In any case, the intense pain had knocked him down in an instant, causing boundless darkness to surround him. There was no perception in the darkness and there was no concept of time. He didn't know when, but a light suddenly flashed in the darkness and didn't leave. It woke him up from his coma and he entered a bizarre dream. In the dream there was no green grassland, galloping bison, familiar mine pit, dusk, or a face that he missed. There was only an endless white light that moved in a strange way in the space in front of his eyes. Sometimes the white light connected into a straight line that reached the end. Sometimes the white light automatically divided into countless shining fragments. Sometimes the white light became a dot that constantly rippled into the surrounding space. In the dream, Sulu looked at these strange scenes unconsciously, and then he found that the white light became a line of words that he could understand in the dark background. Chapter 128. At the moment of life and death in the underground parking lot of the gymnasium, Sulu's willpower played a crucial role. His body, which was like a dried-up well without water, actually erupted with power once again. The source of the mysterious power at his waist began to violently spew out the energy he had accumulated for 5 years, but never had the opportunity to truly erupt. However, he didn't know how to use this energy. He could only allow this energy to occupy every pair of muscle fibers in every cell in his body. It rushed up and was released like an electric current. Perhaps it was bioelectricity, or perhaps it was an even more miraculous existence that transcended matter. But in any case, after this energy helped him destroy the militants in front of him, it also invaded his brain and nerves, bringing him unbearable pain. Most importantly, when the energy traveled up his back, it passed through the chip that every citizen of the Federation had. It caused great interference to the microelectronic calculations in the chip. This led to Sulu's coma and the cloud computing error of the Bureau of Proclamation's central computer. This situation should have never happened in the history of the Federation. However, it was unknown whether or not Uncle Feng Yu had encountered such a coincidental situation back then. It was this extremely rare and bizarre state of the chip that directly caused the Bureau of Proclamation officials to be nervous and the enormous central computer to constantly scan, search, locate, and repair the chip. At this moment, Sulu was the Sulu in his dreams, the Sulu in his instincts. He was neither happy nor afraid. He just stared blankly at the line of white words in front of him, not understanding the meaning of this sentence. Establishing active contact. Do you accept? Sulu understood what active contact was. He who was in this dark space wanted to contact someone. He didn't even know why he stayed in this boundless dark space. He even forgot who he was. The line of characters condensed from white light in front of him slowly dissipated, and then condensed again at an even faster speed. However, it was getting closer and closer to his vision. Establishing active contact. Do you accept? Sulu didn't respond. The white characters disappeared again and condensed again, getting closer. Initiate contact. Do you accept? Sulu still didn't react because he didn't know how to accept it. He just looked at the white characters in the dark background in astonishment. He wanted to open his mouth but didn't know where to open it. He wanted to reach out to touch the beautiful light and shadow in the dreamscape, but didn't know where his hand went. The line of white characters disappeared and condensed again, as if it would never get tired of it. This dream occurred 3 days after Sulu had fainted. At that time he was lying on a strange bed, his body twitching nonstop, his forehead burning, his eyes closed, but in that black dream space, he stared blankly at the white characters in front of him, completely unaware of what was happening in the outside world and what was happening because of him. That day, in a quiet building on the outskirts of the capital, the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation were monitoring the Federation according to the classification of events. Among them, there was a document marked as a Level 3 sequence event. It was entered into the central computer and listed as a priority. Almost at the same time, the central computer gave the results of the calculation and positioning. Separated by a thick partition wall, the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation looked with satisfaction at the several pieces of white paper spat out by the terminal output device. They looked at the names and numbers of the victims of the Linhai State Gymnasium on the paper. As long as it wasn't something that happened too long ago, as long as the exact time and location were given, The central computer could accurately determine the identity of the person through the chip on the back of the person's neck. It could also determine the time of death through the chip's expiration time. Comparing the two, it could give a death list that was close to the truth. First, the glory of the charter enveloped the entire Federation. The Bureau of Proclamation wasn't omnipotent, but the orderly development and harmony of the Federation was separated from the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation. This staff member compared the list of events sent by the government with the list in his hand, and suddenly found something strange. Because the name in the list of events that was specifically marked in red didn't appear in the positioning results of the central computer. The person called Sulu still wasn't marked. Under the harsh terms of the first charter, the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation would rarely continuously locate a single person who wasn't a level 1 sequence event. But in the case where the name and identification number were known, it was always very easy for the central computer to determine a person's survival status. This staff member's expression became serious. He held the document in his hand and walked into the elevator. After an unknown amount of time, the elevator stopped. He walked into the assistant director's office and reported to the middle-aged civil servant behind the desk, "There's a problem. Is it serious?" The assistant director of the Bureau of Proclamation didn't even raise his head. He calmly asked, but in his heart, he wondered if the old director's golf should be replaced. Every afternoon, the director would go for a walk on the lawn, but he threw the complicated work of the bureau to him. It was very tiring, but he was also very happy. "I don't know if this matter is considered serious?" The staff member shrugged and handed over the document in his hand. He said, "The survival status of a natural person." The old man actually couldn't immediately find an answer. When the assistant director heard the first half of the sentence, he raised his head in shock. This was because all work in the Bureau of Proclamation was carried out according to a fairly standard process. The events in the Federation were divided into 12 sequences. How could this subordinate say something that he didn't know if it was considered serious? However, when he heard the second half of the sentence, the assistant director's brows furrowed. He said, "Is the information incomplete? You have to know that the old man is already very old. Searching among a population of tens of billions is not an easy task to begin with." The staff member walked behind the desk in a bad mood and pressed the light screen button. He said, "In the list that was handed over, it just so happens that the person's code is on file. Because someone checked him before, but the result was that he couldn't confirm it." It was very clear that the working atmosphere of the Bureau of Proclamation was very different from what the outside world had imagined. Not only did it not have a mysterious and old-fashioned feeling, but it was very casual between classes. "You're talking about the case in Linhai State?" The assistant director's expression suddenly became serious. This was because he knew that this case was arranged at the last minute. It was like jumping the queue. On one hand, this case involved the upper echelons of the Federation and even the military, which was why it was set as the third sequence of events. More importantly, because the party involved in this case was the family of the old director's distant relative. The assistant director furrowed his brows and looked at the computer screen that continuously scrolled by. After a long silence, he said, "This person called Sulu, is he alive or dead?" "You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask?" The staff member retorted in a bad mood. The assistant director touched his gradually wrinkling forehead uneasily. After a pause, he said, "The self-check program?" The staff member asked a few questions softly through the intercom. He then raised his head and shook his head helplessly. "The self-check program just finished." The old man showed that there was a small logic error in the cloud domain. He looked at the assistant director and asked in a soft voice, "Has this happened before? I remember hearing the old director mention it once." The assistant director painfully rubbed his temples and kept searching through the memories in his mind. "It seems like it will take 6 to 7 days for it to automatically fix itself." The core area of the Bureau of Proclamation was extremely deep underground. The 5-person team that designed the underground structure of the Bureau of Proclamation very proudly announced that in the imaginable era of civilization, no weapon could destroy the core of the Bureau of Proclamation in a short period of time. The core of the Bureau of Proclamation was the central computer, which was the old thing that the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation talked about. This computer had a very long history. Judging from its age, It was old enough to be the ancestor of everyone in the Bureau of Proclamation. Therefore, in its long and boring life, the cheerful staff of the Bureau of Proclamation gave it such a cute and affectionate nickname. The core area was too deep underground. Although the air conditioning system was constantly working, the psychological problem still made it difficult for most people to adapt to this atmosphere. The good thing was that the central computer never needed the help of humans for its processing and information collection. In a sense, from the director to the cleaning lady of the Bureau of Proclamation, all the staff of the Bureau of Proclamation were serving the central computer, the old thing, and the old thing was serving the entire Federation. There was not a single person in the spacious room. A solid and thick physical barrier separated the central computer's display screen from the busy workers. The two-dimensional information display screen in midair constantly flashed the radio wave signals, video signals, and audio signals captured by the electronic surveillance network from all corners of the Federation. The images flashed extremely quickly and turned into beams of light or data streams. Those beams of light or data streams were sometimes like a straight line, and sometimes they were divided into countless segments. Sometimes they were blossoming like waves on the two-dimensional information display, integrating, combing, and retrieving the data in a way that only they could understand. The abnormal logic error in the cloud computing domain did not interfere with the daily work of the Federal Central Computer. It still silently and loyally filtered all the images that it could see, calmly waiting for orders from humans. No staff noticed, or perhaps they were already used to not paying attention, this two-dimensional information display screen that they could not see clearly no matter how hard they tried. In the extremely small corner of the display screen, rows of tiny light runes appeared in sequence. Citizen number SLAT 510200431X. Information node recaptured. Name Sulu Remarks. Federation Criminal Case 3767. 1 involved. Warning, information node is abnormal. Positioning failed again. Serious warning 0. 4% probability, Citizen Suli's information overlaps with that of number 72. Response. Initiate contact and attempt to locate. If the target refuses, establish an observation system and submit a report for the government to handle. The tiny light runes disappeared, and another row of characters repeatedly appeared on the Federal Central Computer's display screen. Establish active contact, accept or not. Chapter 129. In the summer of year 65 of the 37th Constitution calendar, the Federation's most wanted criminal, Uncle Fengyu, who was determined by the Central Computer to be in the first sequence of events, was turned into a pile of ash by the West Woods military's ancient bell. That night, his apprentice, his little sidekick Sulu, accompanied by a thunderstorm, accompanied by a painful howl, replaced the chip in the metal bracelet on his wrist with the back of his neck. From that moment on, Donglin orphan Sulu died, and the young retired soldier Sulu was born. No one in this world knew that at the moment Sulu replaced the chip, in the distant capital ring planet S1, in the core area of the Bureau of Proclamation on the outskirts of the Special Zone, the Federal Central Computer had made the following response. Citizen number DLAS 420500481X. Information node missing. Name Sulu Remarks. Federation 4427. Target 2. Death confirmed. Warning. This is an extension of the first sequence of events. Serious warning. 30% chance that Citizen Sulu has entered an abnormal situation. Serial number 72. Citizen Sulu has entered an abnormal situation. Serial number 72. Response. Search on your own. If you can find them, initiate contact. If the target refuses, establish an observation system and submit a report for the government's reference. Abnormal Situation Handling Program 1 end. More than a year later, the first Abnormal Situation Handling Program was restarted. Although the Federal Central Computer had determined that Sulu Orphan from Donglin Orphan had a 30% chance of entering an abnormal situation, and Sulu, the gatekeeper from Linhai Prefecture, had overlapping information with the former, so the possibility of entering an abnormal situation was even lower. However, the Central Computer was still silently and faithfully executing the program. It constantly tried to relocate the damaged information node through the huge network across countless galaxies, trying to form an active contact mode with the other party. In the central computer's records, there had been 72 abnormal situations or suspected abnormal situations in history, all of which were first-sequence events. In the central computer's operational priority level, they were absolute priority. The brilliance of the charter tried to separate a little bit, approaching Sulu who existed in this world like dust. Therefore, the words of those white light talismans began to repeat over and over again, appearing in that space with a dark background, appearing in front of his eyes. However, there was no response because he was unable to make any response. Initiate contact. Do you accept? After an unknown amount of time, in the spacious room deep inside the building of the Bureau of Proclamation, a row of tiny cursor characters appeared below the two-dimensional projection light screen. Initiating contact has failed. Determining if the other party refuses. Sulu, who was in a coma and in a dream, did not know that he had begun some kind of contact with the most advanced technological civilization in human society. In his dream, he stared blankly at the light talisman in front of him that kept disappearing and condensing. Then he realized that the light talisman had disappeared. In an instant, a feeling called loss began to spread in this space. The disappearance of the light talisman was actually the central computer determining that the other party did not accept the initiating contact and began the next step of the program activation. If it determined that Sulu had refused the initiating contact, according to the first abnormal situation handling procedure, the central computer would establish an observation system. At the same time, it would produce a situation report in the shortest amount of time and submit it to the Federation government for reference. Without a doubt, if a detailed report on Sulu really appeared in the Bureau of Proclamation, it would definitely arouse the suspicion of many people. The past and history of this fake identity would all be dug up. In front of the Federation's pervasive state apparatus, Sulu would definitely not be able to perfectly play the role of a retired soldier. The true identity of a fugitive from the Federation would be exposed in the light of day, and he would face the severe consequences of the first sequence of events that would follow. This moment was the most critical moment since Sulu's escape. The most dangerous moment might be in the next second. While he was still in the dark dream, he would face the pursuit and assassination of everywhere. Just like Uncle Fengyu in the past, the central computer's program paused for a moment at this moment, and then it gave the most logical judgment it thought. Denied. Initiating the second type of contact. In the unconscious Sulu, there were no abnormal changes to the nerves in his cerebral cortex. The microchip behind his neck was determined to be damaged, and the central computer seemed to be able to sense the changes in his brainwaves through a certain method through the microchip. From this, it confirmed that Sulu did not reject its suggestion to initiate contact, but rather due to some reason the other party was unable to respond. At this moment, the central computer determined that the target it was constantly searching for was in a completely unconscious state. In other words, it was commonly used in human society to describe a person in a vegetative state. The crystallization of incomparably advanced human technology, the incomparably advanced monitoring methods, and the incomparably mechanical extension of the program finally allowed the central computer to come up with a mechanical and laughable conclusion, but it was also the conclusion that was most likely to be closest to the truth. It had to be said that Sulu's luck played the most important role in this moment. And following the activation of the second type of contact program of the central computer, even more miraculous things began to happen to his body. Countless scenes began to be instilled into his mind through the microchip. Although these scenes would occasionally distort and be interrupted, they continued to steadily pour in and flash before his eyes. What was the second type of contact? No one knew. Sulu was unable to wake up from his black dream. He could only look at the endless darkness. Black represented nothingness, represented death, and represented nothing. Then he saw an image. In the image, a young woman wearing a white nightgown was holding a baby. The young woman's face was filled with unquestionable love, as if she could not wait to devote all of her life to the baby in her arms. This was the most cherished mother-child kinship of mankind. Sulu was an orphan. He had lost his parents and sister when he was very young. He missed them, but he had to admit that the faces of his family had long been blurred in his heart. He looked at the mother-child pair in the image and felt slightly envious, but did not have too strong of a reaction. That unknown existence seemed to have sensed this. A second image appeared before his eyes. It was a group of children running and kicking a ball on the grass. This represented youth, represented friendship. Sulu did not have many friends. He cherished them but did not have much of a reaction. In the black dream, those strange images appeared more and more, and the speed at which they appeared became faster and faster. They filled the entire space. Those images showed the most spectacular snowy mountains on the Westwoods planet, the magnificent red rocks in the S3 desert in the upper forest, the beautiful lakes in the outskirts of Philadelphia, and even more so the endless starry sky that gave people a sense of awe and reverence. Those stars that had existed in the universe for hundreds of millions of years seemed to exist forever. In the black dream, the layer of red artificial dust above the planet of the East Forest region appeared, and the open-air mine pits that were barely visible under the dust appeared. Those mines had made great contributions to human civilization, and now they lay quietly in the green grassland. They looked like gunshot marks on the planet, and there was a breathtaking beauty to them. Sulu felt that it was very familiar. His heart ached, but he subconsciously felt conflicted. Along with his emotions and the subtle reactions in his cerebral cortex, the scene in the black dream changed again. It turned into expensive cars, into delicious delicacies from all over the world, into champagne with tiny bubbles rising from it, and into hard liquor with a sweet taste in its amber color. Countless bright and beautiful colors appeared in the black dream. Those were women. There were all kinds of women. There were female students with long canine teeth and ponytails wearing student uniforms. There were upper-class women in formal wear who walked slowly. There were young girls wearing tennis skirts with their bare thighs and exuding a youthful aura. Mature, young, beautiful, bashful, sunny, delicate, clothed, partially undone, completely naked and seductive. Women followed the bright images and walked gently. The images in the black dream included the aspects that humans valued the most and desired the most. However, they were still not enough to cause the muddle-headed Sulu to have too strong of a reaction. The rapid influx of images and data caused the entire dark dream space to become somewhat unstable. Countless invisible cracks seemed to be tearing at something. Sulu couldn't feel his body, but he felt an unbearable pain. He wanted to cry, he wanted to scream, but there were no tears and he couldn't make a single sound. In the black dream, the constantly flashing images served to accentuate the loneliness of his consciousness. While he was lonely, he still had to endure such pain. The space was expanding as if it could explode at any moment. If it wasn't for Sulu's consciousness existing in the dream being as tenacious as his body, perhaps he would have already gone mad. He had to remember something, grab hold of something. At this time in the rapidly flashing images, a chipboard appeared. The tiny solder points on it glowed faintly against the black background. With a single thought, the switching of images slowed down. All sorts of tools with their shells removed, those familiar household appliances that had accompanied him for many years, those exposed circuit boards, those hard metal brackets, those blueprints, those precise equipment in the control room, all of them were displayed in the black space in the form of images. He stared at one of the blueprints and studied it carefully. That unexplainable pain finally subsided a little. He felt that the lines and structure on the blueprints were very familiar. It was an M52, a black M52. It was the military mecha that had broken through the wall in the underground parking lot of the gymnasium. With a single thought, countless blueprints of the internal structure of the mecha flew in from the periphery of the black space like snowflakes. They flew in front of his eyes and into his mind, as if they were very happy to have found something that he could focus on. He had seen some of the blueprints before, but he had never seen most of them before. Those circuits and design ideas were so novel, and those control system designs were so beautiful. Sulu stared at everything in front of him in a daze. He gradually remembered some of it, but began to look greedily at those images. However, the images moved faster and faster, so fast that he could not see them clearly at all. But strangely, these images that entered the black dream seemed to exist in his mind. The images flowed in faster and faster. The space of the black dream could not hold on any longer and shattered into countless pieces. That intense pain returned to Sulu's mind. With a buzz he fainted, fainting in the dream. But he woke up in reality. The black dream shattered, and a white light descended upon the human world. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the faint sunlight coming in through the window. He saw the girl wearing a white gauze dress under the sunlight. He saw that smear of purple. He remembered what had happened before he fainted, but subconsciously judged that he was still dreaming. If it was not a dream, how could he see this smear of purple? Chapter 130. This was a clean and bright large room. The surrounding walls and decorations were very light, from white to yellow, making it very comfortable to look at. There was a small table by the window, and under the table was a fluffy blanket. On the blanket was a girl wearing an ordinary white gauze dress. The girl sat by the table, quietly reading a thick book on the table. Her messy short purple hair covered her ears, but her sparkling and tender earlobes playfully poked out from the messy purple hair. The bright and beautiful sunlight shone in from the window. There was not a speck of dust in the light. It was so clear, and when it shone on her face it made her expression even more dazzling. Her long eyelashes quietly rested on the girl's eyelids, and her white jade-like cheeks slightly blushed under the sunlight. The thickness of the book was thicker than her hands, making her pair of soft and boneless hands look very delicate. Under the afternoon sun, the pure girl seemed to be reading a book, but it was more like she was sleeping soundly. Purple hair fell from her smooth forehead, like a grape leaf, gently caressing the girl in her sleep. This was a moving picture. Sulu was moved. He stared blankly at the sunlight not far from the bed. Looking at the girl under the sunlight, he felt that his eyes were a little dry, and that his brain was not enough. The picture in front of him seemed to be still, but it was so vivid. It was like the poster that the uncle had hung in the operation room of the mine, but the girl who should have appeared on the poster was a little more mature than when she was 14 years old. She was still an incomparably charming girl, but her eyebrows, that straight nose, and those crystal hairs clearly visible under the light all told him, "This is Jian Shuier. This is the real Jian Shuier. This is a living Jian Shuier." Sulu wanted to rub his eyes, but he felt a sharp pain coming from his right arm. He almost cried out, but because of the loss of voice in his throat, it turned into a muffled sound in his throat. With difficulty, he moved his gaze away from the window and looked down at his body. He saw that there were a few pipes connected to his body, and he was lying on a snow-white bed. There was an emergency button and an oxygen channel beside his hand. It seemed to be a hospital bed. The memories before he fainted had already returned to his mind. He knew that everything in front of him was not a dream, although it was very much like a dream. He didn't know how he survived and appeared in this ward when he was clearly about to die in the hands of that militant. Sulu was a very calm person. From the sunlight shining in through the window, he knew that he had definitely left Linhai Prefecture. That snowy world shouldn't have such bright sunlight, but in the next moment, he wasn't sure. What if he had been unconscious for half a year, and it was already summer in Linhai Prefecture? Who saved him in that desperate situation? Sulu stared blankly at the purple-haired girl by the window. He didn't understand how Jian Shuier came out of the dream and quietly fell asleep by his bedside while holding a book. But he survived. This fact made Sulu feel incomparably relaxed and happy. In his nearly 20 years of life, this was the first time he was so close to death. It made him seem like he had a new understanding of life. At this moment, he thought of the strange black dream he had when he was unconscious, but he immediately threw that strange dream to the back of his mind. Because there was a dream in front of him. If the strange dream in the black space was a nightmare, then the moving scene in front of him was a beautiful dream. A beautiful dream come true. After waking up from the coma, Sulu gradually woke up. His brain gradually regained control of his body. This also meant that his body's perception could accurately enter his brain. After a slight numbness, there was a feeling of tension and dryness everywhere. Then, Sulu felt an unprecedented pain. He could feel something in his right leg. It was a painful feeling. He felt that his leg was like a glassware that had been smashed into pieces and then reassembled. It was full of cracks and every crack was a pain. And his body was left with an unknown number of wounds, all of which were painful at the same time. What was even more terrifying was that inside his body, behind his neck, every bone, every pair of muscle fibers began to ache. It was as if he had experienced countless exercises, causing irreparable damage. With a muffled groan, Sulu stared at the snow-white ceiling. His habitual squinting eyes stared fixedly at that spot. A few drops of cold sweat flowed down from his forehead, along the skin around his ears, and flowed to the pillow. He was very strong and his endurance was very strong. He was a stone from Donglin, but under this kind of pain he was almost unable to bear it. He had to find a way to divert the pain from his surroundings. It was the same principle as how agents liked to watch pornographic movies when they were cutting flesh to remove bullets. Fortunately, there was a scene in the room that was enough to completely attract Su Li's attention. With great difficulty, he turned his neck and looked at the purple-haired girl by the window. Su Li's grunt on the bed woke the purple-haired girl by the window. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly as she woke up from her sleep. Rubbing her eyes, she appeared to be in a daze. Looking at the thick book in her hand, she cutely stuck out her tongue and smiled. Then she stood up and stretched as much as she could under the sunlight. She clenched her fists under the sunlight and raised her arms, stretching her body as much as she could. This posture completely exposed the curves of her body. Su Lu, who was on the bed, watched the sunlight pass through the transparent glass window, through the clean air, and sprinkle on the white-shirt girl's body. For a moment he couldn't help but be stunned, forgetting the pain that was everywhere in his body. The sunlight sprinkled down, penetrating the white dress on the girl's body. The white dress was very light, and under such direct sunlight, it didn't provide much of a cover. The white dress was almost transparent under the sunlight, gently covering the youthful girl's body. Especially when looking from the back of the bed, the magnolia-like body could be seen even more clearly. In the clear light screen, the girl's soft curves were wrapped in a white tube top. Her waist and lower abdomen were glowing with white light. She was very beautiful. Su Lu looked at this scene in shock and subconsciously wanted to close his eyes. In the past, Uncle Feng Yu once told Su Lu that if he met a girl in his youth and she was very beautiful but he didn't want to peek at her body, and he didn't dare to fantasize about things related to lust in his mind, then it proved that he liked her and it was a true kind of like. Su Li's youth had already ended, and he had entered his youth. However, in the long 20 years of his life, he only had this kind of feeling for two people. One was Zhang Xiaomeng, and the other was this purple-haired little girl in front of him. For him, Jian Shuier was an unreachable dream. She was the object of his incomparable inferiority when he shouted loudly that he wanted to marry her. However, she was also the memory that accompanied him day and night. In Su Li's heart, Jian Shuier was a composite of many emotions. At some point, he even thought very self-deprecatingly that he actually treated this idol of the Federation as his own little sister. This was because he had a very innate sense of intimacy with her, just like when he saw Xian, therefore he wanted to close his eyes. He always felt that peeking at that white dress was a kind of blasphemy to her. However, Su Lu had already seen those erotic scenes. At this moment he couldn't treat her as a family member at all. He only knew that he saw a beauty that countless men of the Federation wanted to see but never got to see. At this moment he, who was extremely weak, felt the most intense stimulation. It was even more lethal than all of the various naked and incomparably seductive women in that strange dark dream combined. The Federation idol, who was wearing a white dress and had a head of messy purple hair, squinted her eyes slightly under the sunlight in the ward. She enjoyed the sunlight that hit her in the face. Her sandalwood lips parted slightly, and she sighed in satisfaction, adding to her charming beauty. A light tearing sound rang out in the ward. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she tilted her head to look at her white dress. She said in distress, "Poor dress. It has accompanied me for 4 years. Why did it tear with a wave of my hand? Did I really gain weight?" Her eyebrows furrowed as she asked herself pitifully. "No, you've grown up." Su Lu stared at the youthful figure under the white dress. How could she have thought that the little lover of her dreams would actually say such a ridiculous thing? After he explained for her in his heart, he couldn't bear the mental stimulation and the physical torture anymore. His eyes turned black, his head tilted to the side, and he directly fainted. Jian Shuier seemed to have noticed the slight movement on the bed. After a slight pause, she walked over to the bed. She stared blankly at the young man on the bed who was still in a coma. Looking at the young man's ordinary face, she naturally thought of the thrilling scene after the concert. She thought of how she and Sister Tong saved this guy from a pool of blood. Looking at the cold sweat on the young man's face, Jian Shuier tilted her head, took out a towel from beside the pillow, and randomly wiped him. Then she threw the towel aside and began to stare at Su Li's face in a daze. At this time the door of the ward was pushed open. Jian Shuier didn't need to turn around to know that the person who dared to break into the ward without her permission must be Sister Tong. A woman in her 30s walked into the ward. She looked at the scene next to the bed and frowned. Her eyes were full of disapproval. She looked at Jian Shuier and said, "Miss, even if you want to avoid the reporters and prepare for the entrance exam in spring, I don't think you need to come to the hospital every day. What's more, in my opinion, you didn't spend your time studying." Jian Shuier smiled and replied, "There shouldn't be a problem with my homework. The TV station's officers and reporters are equally annoying. After all the choices, it seems that this hospital is the most secretive." She turned her head and quietly looked at Su Li's face on the bed. She also felt a little strange in her heart. Why did she feel so familiar when she saw this person? Why did she always give her a quiet and intimate feeling when she was in a coma? It was as if she had seen him a long time ago. Jian Shuier's eyes slid over Su Li's exposed arm and glanced at the metal bracelet. She didn't pay too much attention to it. Chapter 131. The middle-aged woman named Sister Tong wasn't Jian Shuier's manager, because the entire Federation knew that Jian Shuier didn't belong to any management company, and she didn't have any famous manager behind her. She only had a cooperative relationship with the TV station. Jian Shuier had a studio that specifically served her, and Sister Tong wasn't within the scope of that studio. Her eyes swept past Jian Shuier's body, and she frowned and said, "I remember that this dress was from 4 years ago. Miss, for your image, I think it's better to donate this dress to the refugees in Area S2. Jian Shuier helplessly spread out her hands and said, "I broke it because I was too lazy, so I couldn't donate it even if I wanted to. I thought that since no one would disturb me in the hospital, I could read some books, relax, and wear clothes that I wouldn't normally wear." As she moved, her messy purple hair swayed back and forth, making her look very cute. This idol of the Federation was truly a peerless figure with all kinds of charm. There was one side on the stage, one side on the TV screen, and another side in private. However, no matter which side Jian Shuier was on, she was always so charming. Seeing that Jian Shuier was still sitting next to the bed, Sister Tong sighed helplessly. She stared at the unconscious young man behind her and said, "This person's identity has been found." Jian Shuier was surprised. "We've already contacted the Tai family. Miss, at least you can rest assured that he wasn't involved in the assassination. But I'm very curious, why would the master of the 4th Military Region disguise himself and suddenly appear next to the heir of the Tai family?" Sister Tong narrowed her eyes and stared at Su Lu on the bed. Her eyes were extremely vigilant, and that sharp cold light revealed her true identity as a soldier. A few days ago, in the underground parking lot, she had seen with her own eyes that the unconscious kid on the hospital bed had jumped into the darkness like a fearless wolf. That kind of ruthlessness, the strength and speed of that figure, as well as the skills that he had displayed at the end, all showed that this kid was an out-and-out killing machine. However, after this killing machine fell into a coma, other than the painful and twisted expression of a nightmare, there was only calmness, peace, and simplicity on its ordinary face. Sister Tong stared at Su Li's face. She couldn't imagine that such a terrifying method was hidden under such an ordinary and honest expression. This contrast even made her feel a little cold. Therefore, she didn't want Jian Shuier to appear in this ward, and she didn't want her to be so close to that guy that on the first day of the 67th year of the constitutional era, Jian Shuier completed her first concert in Linhai Prefecture. Although she was the dream lover of countless people in the Federation, the standard national idol, like every young girl, she would fall into a state of joy and excitement after achieving one of her dreams. Thus, she decided to do something very daring. Before the age of 14, she appeared on the screen of Channel 23 of the Federation, triggering a long and drawn-out lawsuit between the Children's Rights Protection Fund and the Federation. She received such a comment from the Chief Justice of the Federation. Jian Shuier had been used to managing her own life since she was young. No one could stop any of her decisions, including elder sister Tong, who was nominally sent by the Children's Rights Protection Fund. Jian Shuier wanted to walk around Linhai as an ordinary person, because she had never been to a university town with a long history. When she was in the special district of the capital, she often disguised herself and accompanied by elder sister Tong to chat with the elderly on the bus. She also pretended to be an ordinary female student on the subway. The staff in the studio had long been used to her whimsical ideas. Elder Sister Tong, as usual, expressed strong opposition but couldn't stop her. The assistant's luxury car, escorted by the police car specially sent by the Linhai Police Headquarters, roared away amidst the enthusiastic cheers of the people in the university town of Linhai. On the other hand, Jian Shuai and Sister Tong were prepared to dress up and wait quietly and happily in a room. When they confirmed that the audience in the stadium had left, they went from the backstage to the VIP area. Along the empty area, they walked toward the underground parking lot where the vehicles had already been prepared. Along the way they saw blood, corpses, and traces of battle. In the distance they could faintly hear the sound of gunfire. They didn't dare to take the elevator, but the lights in the stairs were flashing. On the snow-white walls, blood stains were occasionally illuminated. The scene was extremely terrifying. Jian Shuai didn't want to recall this part of the journey anymore. She had lived under the spotlight since she was a child. She was protected by the applause and cheers of the Federation citizens. When had she ever seen such a terrifying scene with her own eyes? However, because of the powerful family name she inherited, at least no one made her pale, trembling, squat in the corner of the building and really play the role of a pitiful girl. She bravely followed Elder Sister Tong and walked forward in the flickering stadium. At this time, Elder Sister Tong had already informed her subordinates to take out the guns hidden at their waists. However, this outstanding female soldier didn't immediately change their route and take the young miss to escape from the other exits of the stadium. This was because she keenly sensed that there seemed to be a team in front of them that was constantly clearing out the armed forces along the way, clearing the obstacles for them to move forward. She clearly determined that Miss Jian Shuai was just unlucky to encounter such a rare scene in the Federation. These armed forces weren't targeting her. The forces that had the ability and courage to arrange assassinations in the civilian areas of the Federation should be very clear that Jian Shuai had an extremely powerful figure behind her. Killing Jian Shuai wouldn't benefit those forces at all. At that time, Elder Sister Tong immediately determined that this assassination should be targeted at the young man in the VIP box. Although the young master of the Tai family had never met the young miss before, out of courtesy, he still sent her flowers before the concert this time. Elder Sister Tong believed in the strength of the Tai family. Since they were clearing the path in front, then this path should be the safest. She didn't know what other dangers were hidden at the other exits of the stadium. However, she didn't expect that the forces that wanted to kill the young master of the Tai family would actually hide a mecha in the underground parking lot. When the sound of the mecha firing at full power and the sound of the main cannon firing rang out, the lower level of the stadium shook. Jian Shuai and Elder Sister Tong were already in the passageway of the underground parking lot. The gunshots stopped abruptly, and there was a deathly silence. In front of them was darkness. The door through the parking lot was half open, and the air was filled with the smell of blood and burnt flesh. Water splashed down from the ceiling. It was silent. They didn't know if there were still people alive, and if there were any dangers ahead. "Miss, please wait." A cold light flashed through Elder Sister Tong's eyes as she prepared to force her way through. Jian Shuai looked at her worriedly and pulled on her sleeve lightly. Right at this moment they heard a voice. "Don't come over." Then they saw a figure suddenly jump up and rush out of the door. They didn't notice that there was actually a living person underneath the corpse. Right after that, gunshots rang out from outside the door. Flames flashed, blue electric arcs sizzled, and screams sounded continuously. Everything happened in a very short period of time and then stopped. At that time he hid very well under that corpse. The position he chose was also not bad. If he wasn't worried about our safety, he wouldn't have shouted that and exposed his position, putting himself in danger. In the ward, Jian Shuai quietly looked at Su Li's distorted face in his sleep as she thought to herself. Perhaps it was because of this reason that she felt that she owed him something. That was why she asked Elder Sister Tong to help and save this unknown person. At the same time, she also asked her relatives who didn't want to contact them to send this person to the 1st Military General Hospital overnight for emergency treatment. In fact, Jian Shuai didn't know who this unconscious young man was. She didn't even know if he was a member of the Tai family's security or an assassin. She just saved his life as repayment for that shout. At that time was of the essence. Before she knew the identity of this person, She didn't want to hand this seriously injured person over to the government or the Tai family. His name is Su Lu, a student of Yue University. That day, he happened to be with Taizion to watch your concert. Elder Sister Tong said calmly, to be able to sit in the same room as Taizion. It seems that this person has a close relationship with the Tai family. Although I was against Mrs. decision at that time, it seems that it's not bad. After all, the relationship between the old man and that lady has always been good. I only found out today that the Tai family spent a lot of effort to find this person. Elder Sister Tong frowned and said, but he was wearing the uniform of the 4th Military Region. This is really puzzling. What does the Tai family have to do with me? As for the 4th Military Region, I don't understand, Jian Shuer smiled and said, but it's good to know who this person is. I have already notified the Tai family. I believe that they will send someone to pick him up soon. Elder Sister Tong looked at the unconscious Su Lu and smiled. She thought that Miss still didn't want to hear anything related to the old man. The second type of connection has been established. The information node has been recaptured. Establishing the observation system and reserving the data transmission channel. Reporting. Group of 5? The central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation in the outskirts of the capital city recorded these words in its program. Out of the expectations of all the staff, that so-called error in the cloud computing domain was successfully fixed in just one day. What was strange was that even the Federal Central Computer in the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation was suspicious of this program setting, because the Group of 5 had been dead for tens of thousands of years. The level of the mechanical life signs had caused a gap to appear in the light of the first charter. And the chip on the back of Su Li's neck was in this gap. Lying unconscious in the hospital bed, he didn't know that he had just inexplicably passed the most dangerous juncture of his life. He was still dreaming about mechas and idols. Chapter 132. My name is Su Lu. His voice was a little hoarse. He didn't know if it was because he hadn't rehydrated for a few days, or because he had injured his vocal cords during the fight in the parking lot, or because he felt nervous from the bottom of his bones when he saw the Federation idol in front of him. Jian Shui's unkempt purple hair had already been combed very neatly and was casually tied into a braid. However, because her hair was too short, the braid appeared very short and bounced behind her head. It was very cute and appeared much more youthful than her previous appearance. My name is Jian Shuer, she said to the young man on the bed with a smile. Su Lu couldn't help but laugh out loud. He felt that this answer was very clever. Life was full of imagination, but who would have thought that Jian Shuer would personally introduce herself as Jian Shuer? Among the tens of billions of citizens of the Federation, the number of people who didn't recognize Jian Shuer's cute face was definitely much less than the number of people who didn't recognize President Sig. His laughter stopped abruptly because it affected the injuries all over his body. Su Lu felt pain. So it was Jian Shuer's turn to laugh embarrassedly because she knew very well why this guy named Su Lu was laughing. And indeed, she hadn't introduced herself in a long time, except for when she was a guest presenter at the Nebula Awards. But for some reason, after hearing the other person's self-introduction, she subconsciously responded. After the laughter, there was silence. When Su Lu woke up, Sister Tong just happened to leave the ward to make an important call. So the first person he saw was this little girl with purple hair again. This time he was very sure that this wasn't a dream, but that she really appeared in front of him. He became very nervous and somewhat confused. He listened to the other person describe what happened after he fainted. Enterprise forward. Hearing the words that came out of Jian Shuer's mouth, Su Lu thought of something else. The lips of the Federation idol in the TV series said that classic line, and they were talking about something related to him? In the slightly awkward atmosphere, Jian Shuer smiled and looked at the young man who had just woken up with interest. Until just now, she didn't know the other party's name and background because other than the government, even the 1st Military Region's General Hospital didn't have the authority to scan any citizen's file. If it was just to avoid the reporters, other than this hospital that was filled with the smell of medicine, Jian Shuer actually had many other places to go. However, she would take the time to come to the hospital these few days. She thought that the other party had fallen into a dangerous situation of life and death in order to protect her. And for some reason, when she was with this young man, her mood would become much calmer. The unconscious young man seemed to have a soothing effect. For the next few days, Jian Shuier would fall asleep under the sun. Occasionally, she would quietly look at his ordinary face. Because she was sure that he would not wake up, the more she looked at him, the more familiar he seemed. However, now that the other party had woken up, Jian Shuier naturally wouldn't stare at his face anymore. But under that cute smiling face, she couldn't help but recall that day in the dark underground parking lot, that determined and brave figure, and the thrilling battle that followed. During the battle, Su Li's toughness and swiftness left a deep impression on Jian Shuier. Although she had met many strong people in the military, she had always hated those people. But for some reason she didn't hate Su Li's aura. Su Lu was a person who didn't like to talk much. Unless it was necessary, he would rather choose to be silent. He would learn in silence, practice in silence, and fight in silence. Only in front of the people closest to him would he speak more. For example, in front of the uncle Zhang Xiaoming, Shi Qinghai, Tai Ziuan, and Li Wei. Especially in front of his idol, who had only appeared in his dreams, he didn't know what to say. The two young men and women, who had always been very distant from each other, sat next to each other in this awkward silence. At this moment, the countless kilometers between the Eastwood District's mining pit and the capital ring disappeared. Even the distance that required 4 minutes and 12 seconds to transmit a message disappeared. In the end, it was Su Lu who broke the silence. He looked at Jian Shuier's beautiful face and said with a hoarse voice, "Thank you for saving my life. If there's anything you need from me in the future, please don't hesitate to ask." This sentence sounded a little awkward. It sounded too much like the Jianghu tone in the movies. But Su Lu said it from the bottom of his heart. Everyone was used to adding more beauty to their idols, not to mention that Jian Shuier had really saved his life. He said it with utmost sincerity and seriousness. Jian Shuier could also hear the sincerity in his words. After being stunned for a moment, a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. She looked beautiful because she always felt that it was him who had saved her. Su Lu didn't notice this, but he thought about how he had been unconscious for so long. The few people in Linhai who cared about him must have been worried sick. A hint of anxiety appeared between his brows. Jian Shuier could tell what he was thinking. She smiled and said, "Do you want to inform your friends?" "Don't worry, we've already informed the Tai family." Su Lu smiled embarrassedly. His body still couldn't move. Only his smile was as sincere as it had been for the past 20 years. "I want to give a call to another friend." "Girlfriend?" Jian Shuier asked curiously. "Ex?" Su Lu replied with some difficulty. "I'm trying to get rid of the word ex." Su Lu held a phone that wasn't small or delicate. Instead, it had a metallic feel to it. He didn't know that this was the Federation's newest generation of touchscreen phones. He only remembered from the slight warmth between his thumb and forefinger that Jian Shuier had personally opened the phone and handed it to him. There was still the lingering warmth of Jian Shuier's fingers on the metal surface. His heart skipped a beat, and he immediately scolded himself in his heart. When it came to relationships, he was a very honest guy. At least he believed that he had a girlfriend. And most importantly, although he had dared to loudly proclaim that he wanted to marry Jian Shuier under the green tree in the outskirts of Hushi, that was because he believed that Jian Shuier would never appear in his life. Once she did appear, how could he have the slightest bit of wild ambition? Zhang Xiaoming's surprised voice came through the phone, followed by the sound of suppressed sobs. At this moment there was no one else in Su Li's heart, not even Jian Shuier. There was only the woman waiting for his news in Linhai. Yes, she was originally his woman, and she was a silly woman who liked him. Then a complicated emotion appeared in his eyes, because he thought of something. After calling Zhang Xiaoming, he immediately called Mr. Shi. As Su Lu dialed the number that he had memorized in his heart, he was slightly perplexed. It turned out that in this world, he only had a few people close to him. If he really died, wouldn't there be too few people crying at the cemetery? Or could it be that no one would prepare a funeral for him? This was a very bad feeling. When Shi Qinghai's call went through but no one picked up, Su Lu felt even more uneasy. He knew his rogue official friend very well. He had been missing for a few days, so he should have been waiting for his call. The door of the ward opened and Sister Tong walked in. She looked at Su Lu, who was lying on the bed with his eyes open in surprise. The doctor has already come. He said that his injuries are too serious. He needs to talk less and not move, Jian Shuer answered for Su Lu with a smile. Sister Tong looked at her and said, "The Tai family is here. Miss, do you want to meet them?" "No thanks." Jian Shuer stood up and bowed slightly to Su Lu, who was lying on the sickbed, saying goodbye. Su Lu was worried about Shi Qinghai, so he subconsciously nodded. He didn't notice Jian Shuer's departure at all. Not long after, the door of the ward was pushed open, and a large group of doctors in white coats rushed in. In the middle of them was a person who looked like an official. The official walked to the bedside and bowed deeply to the surprised Su Lu. He bowed more than 90 degrees and said solemnly, "The young master will arrive tomorrow." There was a big time difference between the state where the General Hospital of the 1st Military Region was located and Linhai State. While there was a show of a big family's Thanksgiving night in the ward, the streets of Linhai State had just woken up. People coming and going from various companies and government agencies were suddenly walking while eating breakfast. Shi Qinghai stood on the side of the street, lazily leaning against a phone booth, eating bread and lettuce. The red ketchup was like blood that was about to solidify, flowing out from the corners of his thin lips. He looked at the phone that kept ringing, and didn't want to answer it. When the persistent ringing stopped for a long time, he put the phone back into his coat pocket and continued to walk in the direction of Shuanghui Street. The number displayed on the phone was very strange. Although the number was arranged beautifully, like a piece of music, Shi Qinghai didn't have the habit of answering strange calls. Especially at this tense moment, any unnecessary contact might put him in an irreversible situation. In the early hours of the morning, the Federation's Investigation Bureau withdrew a certain investigation notice from its subordinate departments. Shi Qinghai inquired about it through his internal connections, and confirmed that Su Lu had been found by the Tai family, and his life was not in danger. He was no longer worried about Su Lu, but began to worry about himself and his teacher, who had been a spy in the Federation government for decades. In the last few days, Shi Qinghai had always felt that there was an invisible net around him, which was covering him from a very high altitude, and could fall down and trap him at any time. After careful observation, he confirmed that there were at least a few groups of targets monitoring him. Thinking about the secret phone call from his teacher that day, he knew that things were not good. The early hours of the morning were the easiest time for intelligence agents to relax. As an excellent intelligence agent, Shi Qinghai took the opportunity to get rid of the surveillance of his colleagues, and took the risk to go to Shuanghui Street. Linhai's HTD bureau was on Shuanghui Street. Shi Qinghai walked through the side alley next to the HTD bureau building, like a white-collar worker who suddenly went to work. Then he looked up in shock, and found that something heavy was falling from a high altitude. With a loud muffled sound, a car next to him was smashed flat. The person who fell from the top of the car was already dead. His white hair showed that he was not young, and the blood that kept dripping down was like diluted ketchup, which looked extremely disgusting. Shi Qinghai looked at that place in a daze, his eyes slightly squinted. The bread in his hand was already crushed, and the ketchup inside flowed out. Second, it means that the Federation's intelligence department is determined to make sure that there are no more spies in the country. Third, it is naturally recalling a good movie. Last time when I wrote about meeting on the rooftop, the leader said that some readers missed this scene very much. Chapter 133. 15 minutes ago, in the director's office of Linhai's HTD bureau, the gray-haired director ended his recording and began to destroy the data in his computer. After a phone call last night, all the uneasiness he had for the past few days became reality. The director left his home, which had been closely monitored by the Federation's agents. As usual, he arrived at his office half an hour early and began to do what he was doing. His expression was very calm, and the wrinkles on his face were as meticulous as the striped tie on his neck. Since many years ago, when he became a member of the anti-government army, he knew that his life would end in this way. Whether it was as a psychology professor in the 1st Military Academy, or later when he was transferred to the Federation's department, he had always been mentally prepared for this. The director didn't know why he was being watched by the Federation's Investigation Bureau. The operation against him must be very confidential, because Shi Qinghai was in the 4th section, but no abnormalities were found. It seemed that Shi Qinghai was also in the surveillance area. After destroying all the call records in his computer, the director opened the safe, bent down with difficulty, and took out a stack of papers from the compartment. These papers recorded some codes and code names, which were the foundation of the entire network he was in charge of. In the current era of technology, anything recorded in a smart tool could at least be partially repaired afterwards. The anti-government army spy network had always been very cautious in using this most primitive method of recording. After stuffing the papers into the shredder and putting the shredded papers in a wastebasket, the director walked into the attached bathroom of his office. After covering the smoke temperature sensor with a wet towel, he lit a lighter and began to burn the codes that were related to the lives of many people. After flushing the ashes into the water, the director let out a long sigh of relief. He secretly felt lucky that the Federation's Investigation Bureau officers had left him some time to deal with the aftermath, probably because they wanted to get more information. Walking back to his office, the director's thick fingers subconsciously played with the lighter, which was a 50th birthday gift from Shi Qinghai. He took a deep breath and took out his phone to look at the time. He confirmed that there were still a few minutes before his appointment with Shi Qinghai. That kid shouldn't have entered the cafe yet. Only then did he feel relieved. His clumsy fingers pressed a button on his phone. After encrypting a prepared recording, he uploaded it to a temporary file storage on the internet. The bureau chief turned around and quickly locked the thick office door. Then, he walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and carefully observed the gradually increasing number of pedestrians on Shuanghui Street and the quiet side alley under the window. She didn't know what he saw, but he calmly swallowed a pill, took out a pistol from the drawer and pulled the trigger. After a few crisp sounds, a few small round holes appeared on the sturdy windproof French window, but the arrangement was somewhat inappropriate. The bureau chief shrugged. When he was training in the mountains, he always thought that marksmanship was not the most important thing. Now it seemed that he was wrong. Panting, he lifted the heavy swivel chair and smashed it against the floor-to-ceiling glass. The swivel chair bounced back, but the glass window cracked to his delight. At this moment, there was the sound of someone pounding on the door. The bureau chief held the phone in his hand again. Looking at the glass window full of spiderweb-like cracks, he slammed his head into it. The door was forcibly smashed open by the agents. At the same time, the bureau chief's fat body broke through the glass and began to fall to the ground. The wind whistled. The bureau chief in the air saw his subordinates eating breakfast downstairs and couldn't help but laugh. Then he died at the intersection of Shuanghui Street and the side alley. There were screams and screams. In the early morning, no matter who saw such a tragedy, seeing the deformed body and the spurting blood, they would be too disgusted and scared to say anything. Shi Qinghai tightly held the sandwich bread in his hand and walked into the crowd unobtrusively. He stared at the bureau chief's white hair, and his face quickly turned pale. His face was not much different from the people around him. On the ground not far from the car, there was a smashed mobile phone, which was difficult to put together in a short time. Snow-white blood red. Shi Qinghai's eyes widened, as if he couldn't stand the contrast of bright colors, and blinked. The snow in Linhai had stopped today, but people were still used to wearing windbreakers with snow caps. He was no exception. He was like a pedestrian occupied by fear and disgust. He lifted the snow cap to cover his face and walked quickly, but not too quickly, through the main entrance of the HTD Bureau building, and walked into the distance. Shortly after he left, 7 or 8 agents from the Capital Federation Bureau of Investigation rushed out of the building, rushed to the car, and began to anxiously call for something through the communication device. This is a pre-recorded recording. If you can hear this recording, it means that you haven't been exposed, or you haven't been caught by the government. All of my communication devices have been monitored, so I can only use this last method to talk to you. I once contacted Deputy Minister Yang Jingsong of the Ministry of National Defense. I wanted to use our old friendship to try to get some information from him, but not long ago he died and I seem to have been exposed. My contact with Deputy Minister Yang has always been within the scope of contact between a dean and a professor. He was also a top anti-Green Dragon Mountain soldier. So I don't understand why his death would expose me. Yang Jingsong's death should be related to the Linhai Gymnasium incident. If someone wants to connect that incident to the organization, then the contact between Yang Jingsong and me is the best way. You are the person who has the closest contact with me. And you know Sulu, so you should be part of this plan. I can confirm that there is a traitor in the upper management of the organization. From now on, you can't trust anyone except him. If you are exposed, you can try to find someone in Harbor City. That person's address is on the side of a quiet street in Linhai under a cold birch tree. There was a small phone booth covered in thin snow. In the phone booth, Shi Qinghai carefully listened to the last words the director left for him. He fell into silence and his eyes became wet. He walked out of the phone booth, raised the cold sandwich bread in his hand and took a bite. The sweet and sour ketchup made his stomach twitch, and he almost vomited. He threw the bread into the trash and waved his hand to call for a taxi. Dozens of minutes later, the taxi passed by the Linhai Field office building. Shi Qinghai looked through the glass at the strange silence on the floor where the 4 departments were located, and his beautiful peach blossom eyes gradually narrowed. He smiled at the driver in the lower row and said, "Brother, how much would it cost to rent a car to go to Shangye?" A line of cars stopped on the tarmac of the Linhai airport. Taizuan, wearing a brown windbreaker, walked out of a brand new black car without a logo. His face was as pale as usual. He stared at the document in his hand, and a trace of anger gradually appeared in his paleness. He hurriedly read the document in the car, but it successfully destroyed his calmness. Taizuan angrily threw the document into the snow, and said to Butler Jean, "What bullshit is this?" Yang Jingsong, the director of the HTD Bureau, and then Shi Qinghai. "What are those useless people in the government trying to do? Are they trying to tell me that the soldiers who did the assassination got the information from Shi Qinghai?" Butler Jean quickly followed his footsteps and whispered beside him, "The evidence is conclusive. The Federation Investigation Bureau found records of frequent calls between Deputy Director Yang and the director of the HTD Bureau. Although it didn't involve the stadium incident, who knows if they have any other methods of communication." Taizuan suddenly stopped in his tracks, looked at Butler Jean and said, "You believe this so-called evidence?" Butler Jean was silent for a moment, and then shook his head. "Deputy Director Yang, the director, Shi Qinghai, Sulu, it does point to a certain possibility, but the problem is that this evidence chain is too weak. Not only is it weak, there's no evidence at all, so where did the chain come from?" A rare sneer appeared at the corner of Lai Zion's lips. "Some people are just trying every possible means to link this matter to the anti-government army. At least now we have evidence to prove that the director of the HTD Bureau, who used to be a professor at First People's Hospital, was Shi Qinghai's teacher when he was at First People's Hospital, and these 2 people are spies for the anti-government forces. We've known for a long time that Shi Qinghai is a member of the anti-government forces." Taizuan calmly looked at Butler Jean, "And the government doesn't know. Since that's the case, the problem must lie with the director of the HTD Bureau. Some people know his identity, and he can link Yang Jingsong and those tough soldiers to Shi Qinghai, Sulu, and me. I don't care if there's something wrong with the anti-government forces." Taizuan stared at Butler Jean and said, "I only know that some people are trying to take advantage of the fact that I almost died to stir up trouble. I won't allow anyone to break the agreement between Mr. Pabre and Green Dragon Mountain." Taizuan emphasized, "I don't want those dogs of the Investigation Bureau to look at my friend Sulu with suspicion. Shi Qinghai can't die, at least not now. Since the Federation has started to arrest him, think of a way to help him. There's very little we can do in this regard." Butler Jean insisted, "And the Federation government is only responsible for providing a logical answer. As long as Madam can't question the reasonableness of this result, we can only accept it." The 12 special agents of the Special Task Force only found out about young Master's destination that day. Even if the spy among them was able to send out information, it's impossible for the soldiers to be prepared in the middle of the night. Butler Jean continued calmly, "The internal investigation of the family has also been completed, and there are no suspicious points. From the looks of it, the only suspicious point is that Mr. Sulu might have told his friends about his whereabouts, I'm very sorry, I didn't specifically instruct Mr. Sulu on this matter beforehand, and made a mistake. Taizian frowned slightly. After a long silence he said, It can't be sure Qinghai. No matter how much the anti-government forces want me dead, they wouldn't do it now. It's just like how I hope that they all disappear. But I wouldn't push the Federation to send troops to Green Dragon Mountain at this time either. Taizian tightened the scarf around his neck in the wind, and snow stirred up by the airflow of the plane. He walked up the gangway and stepped on the journey to visit Sulu, and said his last words. Although Sulu doesn't have many friends, sure Qinghai isn't the only one. Chapter 134. The Black Tie family's private commercial jet left the runway in the wind and snow. It rose into the cloudy sky and soon disappeared into the horizon, heading towards the Federation's first military district general hospital in the southwest region of Jingzhou. The Tie family staff on the tarmac watched as the young master and his direct subordinates disappeared. Only then did they let out a sigh of relief. On the first day of the new year, the young master was assassinated. The tense atmosphere that had persisted since then finally became a little more relaxed as the jet left. Only then did a middle-aged female staff member dare to come forward. She bent down and picked up the documents that Taizian had angrily thrown away. Taizian had the right and reason to be angry, but these staff members couldn't let any of these internal documents leak out. In an empty ward, Sulu, who had slept for too many days, was still weak, but he didn't feel sleepy at all. The TV in the room was on, and commercials were playing. He felt a little bored. Sure Qinghai hadn't been contacted yet, and Zhang Xiaoming couldn't possibly come over. The Tai family members were all outside the ward at this time, so no one came to disturb his rest. He casually picked up a few pieces of paper from his waist and began to read them. Who knew that he couldn't move his eyes away after reading them? These were the things that Miss Jian Shuer had unintentionally left behind in the ward. Looking at the questions, it seemed like they were mock questions for the joint university entrance examination. Sulu calculated her age in his mind. Jian Shuer should be 17 years old today, which was the time when the Federation's general education ended, but he had never thought that the national idol of the Federation would have to study hard like a normal person, and then participate in the joint university entrance examination. With Jian Shuer's current fame and wealth, it should be enough for her to live a happy and lazy life, right? Although Sulu had never participated in the joint university entrance examination, he had prepared for a long time for the National Defense Officer examination. He could easily tell that this was a comprehensive examination paper. Sulu had only read a lot of information about political and economic history in the library. He hadn't studied it systematically, so he didn't know whether the answers to the questions on the test paper were right or wrong. However, he was very good at mathematics and practical physics. Looking at the questions on paper B, he was surprised to find that Jian Shuer's answers were not wrong. More importantly, the problem-solving process and train of thought written beside the questions were so clear. When he flipped to the last page of the paper, Sulu was stunned and scratched his head with his left hand. Only now did he know that Jian Shuer was preparing to apply for the first military academy, command faculty. However, there was a piece of paper under the test paper. The paper was a design diagram. The paper required the examinee to find a few mistakes in the design. The paper under the question was blank. Sulu looked at this question. His professional habits kicked in again, and he began to seriously reconnect all sorts of virtual pipelines in his mind. Looks like you're in good spirits. Spacing out, Sulu did not hear the heavy footsteps in the corridor earlier. Only when Taizian pushed open the door and entered did he notice his arrival. Butler Jean took the coat Taizian had taken off and bowed sincerely and gratefully towards Sulu on the sickbed. Then, he retreated out of the room and closed the door, leaving the two young men who had just gone through thick and thin together. Only his left arm can still move, said Sulu with a smile as he turned his head with some difficulty to glance at Taizian. After being attacked by a military mecha, Sulu had only survived. Moreover, seeing that the fellow he had saved was also unscathed, he felt a trace of relief. Taizian looked calmly at Sulu on the bed, his thoughts unreadable. After a while, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Saying thank you is indeed a very tacky thing to do. But this thank you still needs to be said. Thank you." Sulu smiled but did not say anything. But your luck is not bad. To actually be saved by Jian Shuier in such a desperate situation. Taizion smiled and said, since she's your idol, did you take the opportunity to ask for an autograph or something? Sulu was taken aback, and then said regretfully, how could I forget about that? Taizion had rushed directly from Linhai to Jingzhou's Southwestern General Hospital without rest. The long flight had made his face increasingly pale. Under Suli's persuasion, the two of them chatted for a while, and then Taizion left the ward. The hospital had probably already arranged a room for him to rest in. The ward fell silent once more. Sulu stared silently at the ceiling, and could not help but laugh bitterly. He thought to himself, Taizion's small frame looks even worse than my heavily injured self. Who in the world is visiting whom now? However, he also knew that with Taizion's status, he had rushed here as soon as he found out about his whereabouts. Of course, it was not just to visit him but more so because he wanted to express some kind of attitude. Although that kind of attitude was not explicitly stated, it was probably nothing more than the kind of gratitude shown in movies that one would definitely repay in the future. What made Suli's feelings even more complicated was that from Taizion's mouth, he roughly understood some of the truth behind the assassination at Linhai Gymnasium. Although Taizion did not completely explain it, he also knew that this matter might have something to do with the federal military. The Tai family seemed to support Councillor Pabre. At this time, Sulu had no idea that Councillor Pabre's trip to Green Dragon Mountain actually had a lot to do with him. All of the tremors originated from the Double Moon Festival ball. The ward fell silent once more. Sulu closed his eyes to rest for a while, but in the end, he could not fall asleep, so he turned up the volume of the television. At this time, the endless advertisements on the Federation News channel finally ended. The news anchor who had reported the good news to the citizens of the entire Federation on New Year's Eve once again appeared on the screen. The news anchor's expression was calm, and he spoke quickly. Today, Councillor Macklin made a statement after attending the completion ceremony of a certain large-scale radio astronomy center in Jingzhou. The image of the Jingzhou government office building appeared on the screen. In front of the building, an old man with white hair and plain clothes was saying something in front of the news station. Beside him was an official who looked to be about 40 years old. His eyebrows and eyes were deeply set, and he looked very charismatic. Sulu looked at the screen and thought to himself, this old man is Councillor Macklin, who serves Xiaoming. For some reason, a sense of disgust welled up in his heart. Although he had always been emotionally inclined towards the anti-government forces in the 4 states and the mountains, and knew that Councillor Macklin had greatly promoted the reconciliation between the two sides in the Federation over the years by upholding the principle of nonviolence. However, when he thought of Zhang Xiaoming, Suli's brows furrowed. Through the introduction of the voiceover, Sulu knew that the middle-aged official beside Councillor Macklin was the governor of Jingzhou. For some reason, His Excellency the Governor actually issued this statement together with Councillor Macklin, and expressed his extremely clear support for him. Senator Macklin's statement vaguely pointed out that there was an undercurrent surging within the seemingly peaceful Federation. Some of the hawkish elements in the military were, or had already been, attempting to interfere with the peace process between the federal government and the 4 states surrounding the mountains. Councillor Macklin strongly condemned these actions and angrily said that Councillor Pabre had just reached a preliminary reconciliation agreement with the anti-government forces in Green Dragon Mountain. When the councillor was about to return to the capital's special district, any despicable and dirty means could only be interpreted as a challenge to the collective will of all the peace-loving citizens of the Federation. Immediately after that, the governor of Jingzhou also made a speech. He strongly praised the conscience of Councillor Macklin and Councillor Pabre, and severely criticized the shameless actions of some people in the Federation government. Sulu didn't know who the governor of Jingzhou was. With the social class he had grown up in, the information he had come into contact with was not enough for him to determine what was wrong with the upper echelons of politics from just one piece of news. However, he still felt that something was amiss. He was not a stupid person. In fact, he could even be said to be a very smart person. His eyebrows gradually furrowed as he thought of the assassination attempt in the gymnasium. He probably couldn't get any more information from Taizion. Sulu was silent for a moment. He took out the phone that the Thai family staff had prepared for him from beside his pillow and dialed Sher Qinghai's number. However, this time, not only did no one pick up, he even heard the sound of the phone being turned off. Su Li's heart began to feel uneasy. He felt that something was happening, and it was something bad. He didn't understand why a small fry like himself would be involved in these things. He only hoped that it didn't have anything to do with the fake chip behind his neck. A burst of pain pulled him back from his thoughts. He furrowed his eyebrows and didn't make a sound. Although the bones in his right thigh were completely shattered and there were several gunshot wounds on his body, which were not something an ordinary person could endure, he wasn't an ordinary person. He wasn't an ordinary person, and he didn't have the intention to torture himself. Using the finger of his left hand to gently push the switch of the electronic anesthesia pump, Su Li calmly lay on the bed, waiting for sleep to come. While waiting, he subconsciously picked up the last piece of paper on Jian Shui's test paper again. He wanted to use the solution to that difficult problem to distract himself and help him fall asleep. The effects of the drug slowly appeared. Su Li felt that his eyelids were getting heavier and heavier. The drawing on the paper in front of him was also getting more and more blurry. One drawing became two, sometimes overlapping, sometimes separating, and sometimes floating around. But why did the drawing in front of him and the drawing on the paper look so different? A trace of doubt flashed through Su Li's heart. The one closer to him, it seemed that some parts of it had already been changed. Yes, this change was very reasonable, this change was very unreasonable. There was no reason for this crystal tube to be placed on this circuit at all. Chapter 135. The effect of the drug gradually faded away. Su Li finally no longer felt drowsy. He stared at the white paper with an extremely cautious and nervous expression on his face. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he could clearly feel the sharp pain coming from his thigh. But he still couldn't get rid of the phantom in front of him, the structure diagram that was so close that it occupied about 1/5 of his field of vision. The lines on the diagram were very clear, and it didn't seem like a supernatural phenomenon that appeared in the air. What was even stranger was that after looking at it for a long time, Su Li had already confirmed that some of the designs on the structure diagram could help him solve the question left by Jian Shui. Although Su Li had some reference materials or books, he believed that he could find the mistakes in the structure diagram in the original question within 10 minutes, and increase the power output to the level required by the question. But it was definitely not as direct, as simple, as incredible as this. Where did this structure diagram come from? Why did it appear in front of him? If it were an ordinary person, perhaps they would have already gone crazy, but Su Li's nerves were indeed much thicker than the average person's. In that strange dark dream that he had already forgotten, he didn't go crazy, so naturally he wouldn't go crazy now. He quietly, stubbornly stared at the diagram in front of him. After a long time, he stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. His palm moved closer to his eyes, until it was about to touch his eyelashes, but the diagram still didn't move and it didn't disappear. Through this action he finally confirmed one thing. This strange power structure diagram didn't appear in the light beam combination in the air, but appeared in his eyes. A blueprint had actually appeared in his eyes. No matter how strong Su Li's nerves were at this time, he couldn't help but feel a buzzing sound in his head, and he was a little dazed. Was this an illusion or something else? Could it be that when he was in a coma, the hospital discovered the strange secret in his body, so they used him as a human guinea pig and put a miniature light screen on his retina? All kinds of strange thoughts flooded Su Li's mind, because he was facing the strangest fact at this time. He had already lost a lot of blood, and now his face was even paler. Lying on the hospital bed, he was silent for a long time. Then he threw down the test paper in his hand and began to blink, close and rub his eyes. He wanted to blow away the blueprint in his eyes, turn it off and rub it off. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he finally gave up on this attempt. He dejectedly tilted his head and stopped thinking about this problem. It wasn't that he didn't want to think about it, but that he didn't dare to think about it. Any normal person would feel at a loss when they found something that shouldn't be in their eyes. Although Su Li's body had a very strange power, it was still something that he could vaguely grasp. Unlike now, he was really worried that he might have become some kind of robot monster. Strangely enough, he didn't know if it was because he didn't want to think about the blueprint anymore, or because he had closed his eyes for too long, but the blueprint that had always appeared in his eyes, even when he closed his eyes in the dark, actually disappeared. Sulu was shocked again. This time he didn't dare to open his eyes. He just tried to calm his breathing and carefully waited. After a while, he confirmed that the blueprint in front of him had really disappeared. He let out a sigh of relief and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, but he still couldn't understand what had just happened. Suli's complexion was slightly better. He silently lay on the hospital bed and looked at the snow-white ceiling. He didn't know what to think in his heart. The news on the TV was still broadcasting, but his heart was already in a mess. He didn't know how much time had passed, but he sorted out his thoughts and confirmed the condition of his body. He clenched his teeth and narrowed his eyes. Like a brave and determined soldier, he picked up the test paper again. The blueprint in the question appeared in front of his eyes again. Sulu didn't want to give up until he figured out whether it was an illusion or something else. He had always been the kind of guy that once he was interested in something, he would study it to the end. However, for many years in the past, he had been studying machines, but now he was studying his own eyes. There was a room not far from his ward. Taizion, who was supposed to be resting, was now quietly watching the TV screen. He didn't expect that he would have to find out such important information through the news. His eyebrows gradually furrowed. Great reconciliation? A hint of mockery appeared at the corner of his lips. Jingzhou was the largest state in Region S1. Especially the state capital, Port City, was the undisputed largest city in the Federation for countless years. Jingzhou was the most economically developed region in the Federation. Since Region S1 was directly under the jurisdiction of the Federation government, there was no position for the chief executive of the administrative region. Therefore, the governor of Jingzhou, who had countless economic resources in his hands, had secretly become the highest-ranking chief executive of Region S1. According to historical convention, the position of the governor of Jingzhou in the Federation was only half a level lower than that of the chief executive of the various major galaxies. Of course, this was under the premise that the big shots in the capital special district were not taken into account. What made Taizion even more alarmed was that he knew very well that Governor Ross's partners were the families of the 7 big families. Why would such a person suddenly stand on the stage and echo Macklin's words? What exactly did this governor, or rather the families behind him, want to do? He's taking advantage of the situation. Butler Jean, who had been standing beside him all this time, sighed slightly worriedly. It seems that Governor Ross is determined to participate in the presidential election at the end of the year. There's only 1 year's time. Can he make it in time? Taizion immediately understood the truth of the matter and said with a frown, "Now the entire Federation is jumping for joy because of the New Year's gift that Senator Pabre brought back. If the election were to be held now, Senator Pabre would be directly elected," Butler Jean said softly. "The original few presidential candidates, because they have been unable to change their tough policies towards the 4 states surrounding the mountain region, have basically lost before the battle in the current public opinion environment. Under such circumstances, they can only invite someone who is clean, who has never expressed any opinion on this matter, and who has a certain level of experience and fame." Butler Jean continued, "The governor of Jingzhou, Ross, is without a doubt the best candidate. This governor has always been very cautious, and has never expressed any extreme opinions. Now it seems that he has been very interested in the position of president for a long time. The key is still Macklin." Taizion quietly looked at the white-haired old man on the holographic screen and said softly, "If the other party really takes a risky step and makes Macklin a candidate for vice president after Ross announces his candidacy, Macklin was just elected as a member of the Federation last year. After all, he's from the 4 states surrounding the mountain region, and now he's sitting on the anti-government military committee. Those families can't be so bold, right? Boldness is all forced out of you." Taizion lowered his head and said somewhat tiredly, "We've successfully created a political environment of great reconciliation with that guy from Green Dragon Mountain. In this presidential election, whoever wants to participate will have to work hard in this environment. The only one who can make a fuss about reconciliation with Senator Pabre is Macklin. If Macklin's story is publicized by those people, it'll be another legend." Taizion's lips curved slightly and said mockingly, "An anti-government old man has become the vice president of the Federation. What other situation could better reflect the great reconciliation of the Federation than this arrangement?" At this moment, the sound of footsteps faintly came from outside the well-soundproofed door. Taizion's train of thought was interrupted, and he frowned slightly. After Butler Jean pushed open the door and took a look, he turned around and said softly, "I think there's something wrong with Su Li's side." Taizion was slightly stunned. When he first came to the hospital, the director assured him that Su Lu was fine. He was just severely injured and needed a lot of time to recover. How could there be another problem after just a few hours? He felt slightly nervous. He put on a set of pajamas and walked towards Su Li's room. At this moment, several specialists from the general hospital had already arrived in Su Li's room, and all kinds of equipment had been moved over. This patient was first sent here by Jian Shuier herself, and then a young influential person came to visit. Although no one in the 1st Military Region General Hospital knew about Jian Shuier's background and Taizion's true identity, except for the director himself, all the medical staff on the entire floor became nervous when the bell rang in Su Li's room. "Apart from the lines, do you see anything else?" A specialist's warm voice came from the room. "No." Su Li's slightly tired and frustrated voice answered him. When Su Lu stared at the question again, the strange structure diagram appeared in front of him again. The second appearance convinced him that this was not an illusion, but something that had really happened. Thus he pressed the emergency bell. Although he knew that there were some secrets in his body that could not be exposed to the public, he was still willing to trust the doctor when faced with such a strange situation. However, he was very careful not to say that what he saw was a structure diagram. Instead, he said that it was a series of very regular and very complicated lines. "How many times has this phenomenon appeared?" "Twice." A specialist walked out of the room and saw Taizion in his pajamas. Before the specialist could ask, he said, "According to the preliminary analysis, it should be a hallucination." "Is it serious?" Taizion said worriedly. If Su Lu left behind some lifelong sequelae in order to save him, he would feel very uncomfortable. "It shouldn't be serious. About 12% of patients will have this kind of symptoms after a long period of coma." The next morning, the data from the examination of various instruments was gathered into the final diagnosis. A specialist walked out of the room with a serious expression and said to the pale Su Lu, "Young man, are you mentally prepared?" Su Lu did not look at the question again that night. He forced himself to sleep under the influence of the anesthetic pump. Until now, he looked at the doctor with a forced smile and said, "Please go ahead. There are many reasons for the formation of a hallucination, but after you fell asleep yesterday, we conducted a medical observation and found that there is an abnormal discharge phenomenon in a certain area of your brain. Now it seems that it is this discharge phenomenon that caused the hallucination. To be precise, the lines you saw in your eyes did not really appear in your eyes, but there is an abnormal electrical wave activity in the relevant area of your brain." Su Lu listened in a daze. He did not pay attention to what the doctor said and asked, "What kind of disease is this?" Chapter 136. Hearing the word epilepsy, Su Li's face turned pale. He didn't know the specific cause of epilepsy or the profound medical principles behind it, but he knew that this disease was often referred to as epilepsy or convulsion by ordinary people. No matter how optimistic, cheerful, and positive a young person was, if they knew that they had such a disease, the word pessimistic would be written on their forehead in an instant. Being sick was not scary. Even if he was terminally ill or had a broken leg, he would not be defeated by Su Lu, who was as stubborn as a rock. Only this kind of disease that could cause his whole body to convulse, foam at the mouth, and slanted ears and mouth at any time made him feel a chill. If he had liver cancer, he would hold his stomach and endure the pain and enjoy the soybean-sized beads of sweat on his forehead. That would be a heroic and cool death. But if he had to constantly worry that he might become a fool at any time and keep convulsing on the floor, even if he could live like a normal person, this kind of living was too unsightly. "Are you sure that I have epilepsy?" Su Lu asked in a hoarse voice as she looked at the specialist doctor beside her with a hopeful expression. "The possibility is very high, at least more than 90%. The expert had seen many patients in his life, so naturally, he didn't take epilepsy to heart. He said calmly, "After you fell asleep last night, the electroencephalogram and the EEG signal sent back by the electrodes confirmed that. In this area of your brain, every once in a while the neurons will have an abnormal discharge phenomenon." The expert pointed at a certain area of the brain imaging and said seriously, "The discharge rate of the cortical pyramidal cells of a normal person's brain is less than 10 times per second. But last night, we measured that the discharge rate of the neurons in this area of your brain is often more than 100 times per second, and the peak number is as high as 566 times per second. So, we determined that this area is the focus of the disease." Sulu still didn't want to give up and asked, "Is there no other disease that can cause abnormal discharge of the neurons in the brain? Like being stimulated by something or being in a long-term coma, the neurons in the brain have just woken up and are not used to it?" In fact, when Sulu heard the term neurons, although he was a little unfamiliar with it, he thought of the strange power in his body and secretly worried. Of course, there could be other reasons that cause the abnormal discharge of cortical neurons, but after our analysis, we believe that epilepsy should be the most likely cause. When the specialist heard Sulu's words, he couldn't help but smile. He thought that this patient was really good at finding strange excuses for himself. He emphasized, especially in the latter half of the night, when you entered deep sleep, with the abnormal electrical discharge of your brain, your muscles began to spasm intermittently. This is a typical symptom of epilepsy. I admit that what you said earlier may trigger abnormal discharges of cortical neurons in the brain. The expert looked at him with a comforting expression. But this is also known as epilepsy. However, you don't have to worry. According to the results of the examination and the extent of your spasms, this shouldn't be a source of epilepsy, so the danger isn't great. If I manage my life and emotions well, it might be difficult for me to relapse in the future. Of course, even if I relapse, as long as I have someone by my side at all times and I don't sleep in a high bed at night, there shouldn't be any danger. The vast majority of epilepsy patients will only have some minor problems in their lives. At least from the current statistics, the lifespan of epilepsy patients will not be affected in any way. There's no need for surgery. No, unless you want to take the risk of becoming an idiot to help our hospital earn a large sum of money from the Federation's Citizen Medical Fund. After the specialist left, Sulu lay alone in the quiet ward. His left hand, the only thing he could move, unconsciously touched his head. It was hard to believe that his brain was damaged. Could it be the aftereffects of the battle in the underground parking lot? Could it be that the rebounding force of the mecha's strong body had injured his brain? Or could it be? He suddenly thought of the moment before he fainted, the intense pain brought by the mysterious power in his body, especially that feeling like an electric current had passed through the back of his neck and turned into countless thin needles, pricking his brain endlessly. There was no need for surgery, only medication. The key was still to have enough rest, adjust his mentality, and maintain an optimistic mood. The doctor's casual and calm instructions were actually meant to comfort the patient. Of course, if Sulu had an incurable disease, the doctor would probably have said something similar. Fortunately, Sulu was indeed a very optimistic person, and he easily shook off the gray emotions from before. Although the comforting words were actually not very useful, not having surgery on the brain was still something worth celebrating. The mobile phone was bought by the Thai family's staff, and it was even an old model. Sulu knew how the other party was able to do this, but thinking about it, Sanlin Communications headquarters should not make things difficult for the Thai family. Sulu pulled out the display embedded in the metal body of the mobile phone, and felt that it was very smooth, and his mood improved. He began to go online silently, looking up some epilepsy-related information. The more he looked at it, the more silent he became. The more he looked at it, the more he felt that he really did have epilepsy. He threw the mobile phone beside his pillow, closed his eyes and thought for a long time. He probably had secondary epilepsy, and the probability of passing it on to his offspring was only 4 times higher than normal people. The Federation's laws did not prohibit epilepsy patients from marrying and having children. Zhang Xiaoming wouldn't have any objections, right? But he felt that he had to bring more towels with him in the future, or else who would help him wipe the white foam that he was spitting out? According to the information on the internet, when epilepsy patients had intermittent spasms, they had to be careful not to let the patient bite their tongue. Did he have to buy a few hard plastic bones for his pet dog to play with? But raising a pet dog required special approval from the HTD Bureau. Oh right, he only needed to buy plastic bones, he did not need to raise a dog, and he was not a dog. Thinking about it like this, Sulu felt more and more sad. If his life became like this in the future, it would be too far from his ideal life. He silently laid on the bed, his eyes fixed on the white ceiling, showing a hint of depression. So when Taizion sat by his bed, had finished peeling an apple, and directly handed it to him, he noticed. This is a necessary procedure for visiting a patient, but it's a pity. In novels or movies, the person who peels an apple and feeds it bite by bite should be a beautiful and gentle girl. Sulu took the apple, took a big bite, stared at the window and said, "If only Xiaoming were here right now." Hearing Zhang Xiaoming's name, Taizon's eyes slightly narrowed. He smiled but did not say anything to the girl, and said, "You've suddenly become more talkative today." Sulu was slightly stunned, and also felt the change in himself. It probably had nothing to do with escaping death. It was purely because of the shock he received from the doctor today. Taizion already knew about his illness. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said with a smile, "Epilepsy is not a life-threatening illness. It's rare to see you so depressed, I'm not used to it." In the eyes of the friends around him, Sulu was always the ordinary, down-to-earth, smiling guy. It was rare to see him sigh. Sulu frowned slightly and sighed. "This illness is too troublesome, and it's too ugly when it flares up. I've prepared some medicine for you, a new drug. But don't worry, it has already passed the clinical examination. It's just that because it's too expensive, it hasn't been registered in the medical system." After a long silence, Taizion took out a medicine bottle from his pocket and handed it to Sulu. "Don't be too agitated in the future. Also, before you leave the hospital, install a mini brainwave monitor. If you find anything wrong, take a pill." Sulu took the medicine bottle and silently looked at the label. Sure enough, there was no sign of the Federation Medical Administration Bureau. He looked at the precautions, tilted his head slightly, and looked at Taizion in confusion and said, "Tranquilizers? I often take them." Taizion smiled and patted him on the shoulder, and said apologetically, "I still have some things to do, and I'm leaving Jingzhou tonight. I'll leave some people with you. If you need anything, just ask them. Also, I'll come to see you again in a few days." Sulu nodded, and had no intention of asking him to stay. Although he saved Taizion's life, he also knew that Taizion was a high and mighty figure in society, and presumably a very busy guy. It was enough that Taizion personally came to visit him in the hospital. "My private phone number is the first number on your phone. If you need anything, you can call me." Taizion and Sulu had met many days ago in the H1 area of Yue University. It was only now that Sulu got his private phone number for the first time. After Taizion left, Sulu received a few more days of conservative treatment and monitoring in the 1st Military Region's General Hospital. Those highly skilled specialists and professors finally confirmed that Sulu was probably hit by some external force during that incident. The damage to his brain caused damage to the neurons in his cerebral cortex, and caused abnormal discharge, which led to epilepsy. Just as the specialist said, there was no easy way to treat epilepsy, and the focus of the General Hospital's treatment was still on Sulu's severely injured body. The comminuted fracture on his right thigh, and the several gunshot wounds on his body were actually much more serious than the so-called epilepsy. After listening to several consultation plans, only then did Sulu know that he had suffered such serious injuries in the stadium's underground parking lot. If he hadn't put on a bulletproof helmet and vest when he left the VIP room, his life would have been lost in that dark and damp space. Thinking of this, Sulu couldn't help but feel a little scared. He didn't understand why he was always so hot-blooded and impulsive. Of course, he was willing to save Taizion, but almost losing his life was not his intention. At the same time, what made him feel alarmed was that his eyes started to hallucinate again. However, this time it wasn't the power structure diagram, but a very familiar image of the mine pit. Sulu began to doubt the diagnosis of epilepsy. Chapter 137. Power output structure diagrams, transmission structure diagrams, nozzle design diagrams, all kinds of drawings with different sizes and different uses appeared. Just like the slides shown by Professor Zhou of Yue University during his lectures, they flashed before his eyes one by one, appearing and disappearing. However, the scope of these drawings was obviously much wider than the scope of the university professors. In addition to the drawings, there were also endless scenery films. The Federation photographers used different angles to take different still images, all of which were breathtakingly beautiful. Especially the pictures of the Federation's major planets taken from spaceships, they were even more awe-inspiring. There were also flowers, all kinds of flowers. There were also women, all kinds of women. Sulu was half leaning on the hospital bed. The hospital bed could automatically adjust its height, so it was more comfortable to lie down. However, he stared at his thigh that was still sealed by the white plastic and suspended on the metal frame like a white cement stick. There was no expression of comfort on his face. Instead, he felt like he had seen a ghost. His expression was unusually ugly, because at this time, there was a red flower in full bloom on his thigh. At this time, Sulu could clearly see that this picture did not appear on the white plastic. Instead, it appeared in a certain area of his brain related to the optic nerve. Then, it appeared in his perception as a flower bloomed on his retina. This was already the patient Suli's 17th day in the hospital. His epilepsy did not seem to have recurred. At least, the doctor did not hear the bell ring or hear his own report that he had hallucinations again, although in fact the hallucinations were always there. When the structure diagram turned into a picture of the mind, Sulu knew that things were serious. This was definitely not epilepsy. These images that appeared in front of his eyes like miracles seemed to have a mind of their own, and could appear and disappear according to his strong emotional will. Sulu was in the lonely ward at that time. He missed his hometown, the Donglin region. Therefore, the picture of the Donglin planet's mind from the universe appeared in front of his eyes. In the middle of the night, when there was no one around, Sulu forcibly suppressed the fear and uneasiness in his heart and silently carried out many experiments again. He found that when his will was strong enough, some images related to his will would appear in front of his eyes, such as the mountain, the dog, and the woman. The abnormal discharge of neurons in the gray matter of the cerebral cortex was absolutely impossible to control. She had never heard of epilepsy patients being able to make the electrical discharge in their brain work according to their own thoughts, as if they were accessing a database, unless they were taking drugs. What exactly happened? Sulu thought about it silently for many days, but he still couldn't figure it out. Since he was sure that it wasn't a hallucination caused by epilepsy, he didn't tell the experts in the 1st Military General Hospital the truth because he was very worried. When he realized that the strangeness in his brain had little to do with epilepsy, he immediately thought of the so-called muscle spasms that had been monitored by the hospital. It was the power in his body that was repairing itself. It was the trembling that Sulu was incomparably familiar with. However, he was able to successfully control the trembling under his skin. When he was asleep or unconscious, it continued to operate on its own. This was Suli's secret, not a symptom caused by epilepsy. Regardless of the dissuasion of the hospital experts, he insisted on removing all the monitoring equipment during his sleep at night and unplugging all the electrodes on his body. Otherwise, if someone really found out the real reason for his muscle fibrillary spasms, who knew how much trouble it would cause? These days, Sulu alone and silently resisted the images in his eyes. He told himself that all of this was an illusion and that it wouldn't scare him. However, after gradually getting used to the images that appeared with his will, even if they weren't illusions, he was a little numb. After all, these images didn't really turn him into a lunatic. Those images didn't appear in his eyes at any time. Instead, it required Sulu to be extremely focused on certain aspects of the content. Then these images would be pulled out from his mind and presented before his eyes. If those images really appeared in his eyes at any time, Sulu could guarantee that his nerves, which were stronger than the average person's, would not collapse. Because that would mean that as long as he opened his eyes, he would constantly see two completely different images, one real and one fake. Wouldn't that be the picture-in-picture function of the legendary antique television? Or the monstrous hero with two pupils in an even more ancient myth? In the middle of the night, when there was no one around, he tried many times. With the fastest speed, he desperately tried to recall all the images that could be pulled out in his mind. He confirmed that those were not his knowledge, his memories. He silently looked at the flower on his leg. Sulu knew that his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. Instead, it was his eyes that gave birth to a flower, or someone planted a flower in his mind. It had been a few days since he fell into the unknown uneasiness and fear. Sulu forced himself to calmly analyze all the things that had happened since he fell into a coma. After eliminating the possibility that the hospital had used him as an experiment, he naturally flipped through the memories that were dormant in his mind. It was the memory of the black dream after he fell into a coma. Yes, all of the images seemed to be familiar. They all came from the strange and absurd dream after he fell into a coma. He vaguely understood something but still didn't understand anything. He didn't know when and by whom these images were poured into his mind. Why were they so different from normal memory images? Why could they appear so clearly and vividly in front of his eyes? Suli's hand gradually and gently touched the back of his neck. He carefully stroked that small piece of skin. After a long silence, he confirmed that there should be something wrong with this chip. When the heat flow in his body turned into a huge burst of energy, it caused some kind of damage to the chip. The damaged chip uncontrollably released pulses or electric currents, causing abnormal discharge in his cerebral cortex. This caused him to enter that strange black dream after he fell into a coma. Furthermore, it was deeply imprinted in his mind, causing those images to appear in front of his eyes. But the problem was, could it be that the chip itself stored those things? How could he get out of this situation? Could it be that he had to change the chip from the bracelet and start a new life? But the damage to his brain had already become a reality. Would it be useful to change the chip? Would he become a real idiot in the future because of the abnormal discharge in his brain? Although it wasn't epilepsy, it seemed that the current situation was more terrible than epilepsy. Sulu stared at the snow-white ceiling. His facial features were slightly twisted in pain. He kept cursing Uncle Fengyu in his heart. Fake products killed people. Perhaps it was because Sulu had followed Uncle Fengyu and practiced the horse dance in those strange postures for many years, but his physical fitness was already much better than the average person's. Thus, the injuries on his body healed very quickly. This was especially true for his comminuted thigh bone. On the daily photo transmissions, those cracks seemed to be gathering together at a speed visible to the naked eye. This made the doctors in the general hospital click their tongues in wonder. If they didn't know that this patient's origins were a little strange and his background was a little shocking, perhaps they really would have thought of asking Sulu to cooperate with their research. Those tubes inserted into Suli's body had long been removed. In just 1 month since he had been admitted to the hospital, the penetrating wounds left by those military firearms had basically healed. After all, the bones were not injured. Those muscle fibers that had been torn apart and charred by the high-speed rotating bullets had already healed. Only a few pink traces of new skin remained on his skin. The thigh bone that had been fractured by the mecha's recoil couldn't heal so quickly, but at this time, Sulu could at least sit in a wheelchair and relax in the beautiful environment of the general hospital. He wasn't afraid of loneliness, but he didn't like those snow-white walls and ceilings in the ward. This was because every time he was alone, he couldn't help but try to use the snow-white ceiling as the background and pull out those memory fragments in his mind, playing them like a slideshow for himself. As he played, he felt fear, but he couldn't stop even if he wanted to. Sulu felt like a pitiful person who was addicted to drugs. Shaking his head, Suli's face flushed red with embarrassment. He quickly stopped looking at those images of all kinds of women in his mind. These images were too clear and too realistic. It was like looking at a porn magazine. As long as he thought about it, he would be able to see the endlessly tempting porn. And it wasn't the usual imagination that flooded the minds of most men, but real images. What kind of realm was this? This was the true meaning of lust. Sulu, who was new to the relationship between a man and a woman, could barely control his desire to peek at the portrait of 1,000 women in the corner of his mind. However, he naturally thought of his girlfriend. At least in his mind, she was still his girlfriend. Whether it was the fear of his brain's abnormal condition, the stimulation he received, or the loneliness brought about by long-term hospital life, they all made him very eager to see Zhang Xiaoming. The relationship between a man and a woman was nothing more than external factors that stimulated growth. Not to mention, Sulu was facing pressure from all sides at this time. From the moment she found out that Sulu was injured, Zhang Xiaoming had already prepared to leave for Jingzhou. After experiencing the failure and disappointment of the Double Moon Festival ball, the non-professional spy girl obviously hadn't learned her lesson. She still subconsciously saw herself as a normal person. Knowing that the man she liked was injured, of course she couldn't sit still on campus. However, due to Su Li's abnormal condition, Zhang Xiaoming's arrival was delayed for a long time. It wasn't until a few days ago that Su Lu became numb to the strange phenomenon caused by the abnormal power generation in his brain. Moreover, he really couldn't suppress his longing for Zhang Xiaoming. The two agreed to meet at the hospital on the 14th. However, just as he was about to call Zhang Xiaoming to confirm when she would arrive in Jingzhou, his phone received a text message from an unknown number. Chapter 138. There was an old song in the Federation called 27 Glasses of Wine. The song went like this. The first glass of wine, the sun shone brightly, the ivy outside the window crawled into my eyes. The second glass of wine, the spring breeze rippled, the leaves gently brushed my eyebrows. The third glass of wine, the birds chirped, lightly pecking at my heart. The fourth glass of wine, the shadow on the windowsill, making me forget who I am. The fifth glass of wine, the youth was about to fly, passing through the layers of forest. 11 glasses of wine, the mountains were green, an old man was drunk on a rock. 12 glasses of wine, peeking into the abyss, the cliff gave back to the years. 13 glasses of wine, the snail had horns, the world was so tired. 14 glasses of wine, the eyes were getting tired, the people around the fire were about to fall asleep. 25 glasses of wine, thinking of my father, the raindrops fell from the window. 26 glasses of wine, the flies did not fly, the palpitating you and I hid under the leaves, watching the autumn rain fade away. 27 glasses of wine, wiping away a few tears, gently putting down the glasses. This ancient song had always existed in the Federation Elementary School's public teaching materials. It was a poem that all citizens of the Federation had probably learned at one time or another. This poem used ordinary and simple language to describe a young man drinking alone in the rain. Looking at the scenery outside the window, his mind gradually flew into the mountains and rivers, experiencing the imagination of several lifetimes. In the end, his mind returned to his body, remembering his loved ones who had passed away, and tears fell from his eyes alone. The original author of this simple and touching poem had long been untraceable. Moreover, in today's highly developed technological civilization, not many people would still remember this little poem in their hearts. When Su Lu was in the Donglin district, he rarely had the opportunity to hear this song, except in the movie directed by the famous director Lin Longji, who cleverly used 27 glasses of wine as the background music throughout the entire movie. The most recent time that Su Lu heard 27 glasses of wine was in the bar in Linhai. Shi Qinghai, who had an astonishing capacity for liquor, drank 27 cups of strong liquor in a row in that quiet bar on that rainy night before finally getting drunk. He tapped the wine bottle with his chopsticks and sang the song in a soothing and emotional manner to the rhythm of the clanging. His voice was not very pleasant, but it was somewhat hoarse from the torture of alcohol and tobacco. Together with the lyrics, it seemed to have experienced many vicissitudes of life, making people want to cry. At the end of the song, when he thought of his father, the flies did not fly, and put down the glasses. Shi Qinghai finally cried out loud, letting his tears and snot flow onto Su Li's lapel. Therefore, when he saw the text message 27 glasses of wine, Su Lu immediately knew that it was from Shi Qinghai. It had been almost a month since he had been able to contact Shi Qinghai, so Su Lu was a little anxious. However, because there was a big problem with his brain, and because Shi Qinghai had mysteriously disappeared for dozens of days while carrying out a secret government mission, Su Lu was not too worried. At this time he finally began to worry. Shi Qinghai was using a brand new number, and he was using 27 glasses of wine as a substitute. In this world, except for himself and Shi Qinghai, there was probably no one who could understand who 27 glasses of wine was referring to. What made Su Lu even more confused and nervous was that Mr. Shi had warned him to be careful of Zhang Xiaoming. Why? Zhang Xiaoming had been secretly serving the anti-government Senator Macklin. On the last day of last year at the Iron Tower, she had seriously violated the rules and told Su Lu. After all, Mr. Shi was an official of the Federation Bureau of Investigation. Could it be that the government had found out about Zhang Xiaoming, so he deliberately sent a text message to warn him? Su Lu thought to himself. However, Macklin was now a senator of the Federation, and in the news a few days ago, that old man had made a joint statement with the governor of Jingzhou. Even if the government knew that Zhang Xiaoming was serving Senator Macklin, there shouldn't be any problems with Zhang Xiaoming, right? Su Lu lay on the hospital bed with his eyes slightly closed. After thinking for a long time, he gave up on the idea of calling back that unknown number. There was something fishy about this matter, so he had to be more careful. His finger pressed the number 2 on the phone, but he didn't press it. In the end, he pressed 1. "There's something I want to ask you for help with." "What is it?" Taizon's voice on the other end of the phone was very calm. "I have a friend called Shi Qinghai. He's the director of the 4th section of the Federation Bureau of Investigation's field office in Linhai. I haven't contacted him for many days. I don't know if he knows that I'm hospitalized." Continue. "I know that your family has a good relationship with the government. Can I trouble you to help me find out if there's something wrong with him? If he's carrying out some secret mission from the government, please help me confirm it. At least I don't have to worry too much." Taizion's voice on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. Su Lu, who was half leaning on the hospital bed, narrowed his eyes and felt a trace of a bad omen. "I know that Shi Qinghai is your friend." Taizion held the phone and said calmly, "I found out about his news a few days ago. I wanted to tell you at that time, but your current condition is too bad, so I didn't say anything." Su Li's narrowed eyes flashed with a trace of doubt. He asked what happened to him. "The Federation Bureau of Investigation is currently looking for your friend," Taizuan said. "Under these circumstances, you naturally have no way to contact him. He's an official of the Bureau of Investigation. How could he be wanted?" Su Li's expression changed greatly as he asked in surprise, "I don't know what the specific crime is, but I think it has something to do with intelligence." Su Lu was silent on the other end of the phone for a long time. Then he earnestly asked, "I'm going to be discharged immediately. Can you help me buy the fastest ticket back to Linhai?" Taizuan on the other end of the phone frowned. He didn't expect that Su Lu, who was always calm, would actually make such a decision immediately after hearing this news. He disapproved and said in a deep voice, "What do you want to do? Don't forget that you're still seriously injured. One of your legs is still disabled." "My injury is almost healed. Although I can't move my legs, at least I can use crutches and sit in a wheelchair." Su Lu heard the concern in the other's angry voice, so he wasn't angry and explained. Taizuan said without hesitation, "Impossible. The general hospital won't let you leave." "That's why I need your help," Su Lu said. "Shi Qinghai is in trouble. I have to go back and see what's going on. I can help you find out what happened." Taizuan didn't tell Su Lu the whole truth, because he knew Su Li's character. If Su Lu knew that Shi Qinghai was being investigated by the Federation government because of him, Su Lu would be even more determined to go back. "But you have to calm down. You're just a student. Even if you go back to Linhai immediately, what can you do?" Taizuan frowned and tried to persuade him. "And don't forget that he's now a wanted criminal of the Federation." Su Lu on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time before he said, "I have to go back." A wanted criminal of the Federation, in the hearts of ordinary citizens of the Federation, was definitely someone to be avoided like the plague. However, Su Lu himself was a wanted criminal who hid the most deeply, not on the list of wanted criminals. He believed that if he could go back to Linhai, Shi Qinghai, who was currently in a dangerous situation, would be able to easily find him just like when he sent the message just now. And he had the ability to help him. Taizuan on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time before he said, "The situation in Linhai is very complicated. You don't have to go back." He was thinking for Su Li's sake, but Su Lu, in such a tense situation, didn't think about anything at all. He directly replied, "I have to go back." Taizuan's voice rose in pitch and anger as he reprimanded, "Can't you calm down a little? Be more mature." Su Lu on the other end of the phone was silent for a long time. His voice didn't become louder, nor did it become angry. He just said calmly, "Shi Qinghai is my friend and so are you. When a friend is in trouble, I can't be too calm or mature. If I was a little calmer and more mature in the gymnasium, you would already be dead." There were many concepts about friends, but in Su Li's mind, when the other person was in a life or death situation, he would appear by the other person's side and help without thinking. This was what a true friend was. It had to be said that although Taizion had always deliberately made his conversation with Sulu seem as natural as an ordinary citizen of the Federation, he was not an ordinary person after all. He was at the top of this society. Taizion's desire to control was naturally strong. Occasionally, his words and actions would reveal a bit of the attitude of a superior, which was what Sulu wasn't used to. When he found that Sulu was out of his control, he had mixed feelings and couldn't help but sigh. He looked at the phone in his hand that had been hung up and laughed self-deprecatingly. He thought that it was precisely because this guy had saved him more than once that he had to stop him from doing anything unwise. Tell the hospital to tighten their control. Don't let Sulu sneak back to Lin Hai. Taizion calmly said to Butler Jean beside him, "We've already started investigating Zhang Xiaoming, and sure Qinghai is already a fugitive. If Sulu returns to Lin Hai at this time, it will only make everyone misunderstand. It won't do him any good. Should we use coercive measures?" Butler Jean asked from the side. Taizion's delicate eyes flashed with a trace of mockery. Fortunately, he's injured now. Otherwise, if he really wanted to leave the hospital, with our family's bodyguards, who could stop him? Butler Jean smiled slightly, understanding the young master's meaning. After the incident in the gymnasium, the Tai family's security personnel all knew that the young master had a student friend by his side. What shocked them the most was that during the assassination incident, this student's combat ability was even stronger than that of the special forces. Then we won't use coercive measures. Just have people follow him 24/7 and block him in the hospital with a meat wall. Chapter 139. Ever since that phone call, several black cars had been parked at the entrance of the Federation's 1st Military Region General Hospital. In the first-level ward area of the inpatient department, there were many men in dark suits. Especially around Su Li's ward, a real wall of flesh had appeared. At this time, Su Li's injury had exceeded everyone's expectations. He was much better. Although he still had to continue receiving rehabilitation treatment, and his right leg was still a pitiful white cement pillar, at least he could leave his bed occasionally. He could go to the toilet by himself, and he no longer needed a urinary catheter. He could sit in his electric wheelchair and wander freely in the woods of the inpatient department to relax. But ever since the day he called Taizion, no matter where Sulu went to the toilet or did something else, he would be followed by at least 3 Tai family bodyguards. When he went to the toilet, someone would open the door for him, and someone would bring him toilet paper. When he wanted to sit in his wheelchair and go downstairs to relax, there would be several pairs of hands pushing the wheelchair for him. What kind of treatment was this? This was probably the treatment of a Federation councilman in the hospital. Su Li's mood was a little gloomy. He knew why these walls of flesh had appeared. When he looked at the entrance of the inpatient department in the woods, he knew that he could not leave the hospital until he fully recovered. This situation made him feel a little gloomy. He tried to send a few messages to that unknown number, but there was no reply, especially when he found out that he could not even get through to Zhang Xiaoming's phone. A strong sense of uneasiness surged into his mind. He knew that Taizion was doing this for his own good, and it was even more impossible for him to be angry at the walls of flesh around him. These bodyguards were all staff who took orders from their superiors. It was not appropriate to vent his anger on them. Other than calling Taizion a few times and scolding him, Sulu could not do anything else. However, even after Taizion was scolded by him, he still calmly tried to persuade him. The air around him was getting thicker and thicker. It was so thick that no matter how hard Sulu punched, he could not get a clear response. He was almost out of breath. At this time, a visitor came to the hospital. When this visitor entered the ward, the bodyguards guarding outside the ward felt that their eyes were dazzled by the sun. They looked at each other in disbelief, not daring to believe their eyes. Naturally, they forgot to stop that person. Even if these bodyguards came back to their senses, they might not have the courage to stop her. The Federation's idol, Jian Shuier, had actually appeared in front of him and entered the ward? The bodyguards of the Tai family looked at the figure walking through the door, then looked at the middle-aged woman who stayed outside the door. They quickly reported to their superiors through the intercom. Now the only place that no one had disturbed him was this ward. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the snow-white ceiling. He did not bring out the images caused by the abnormal electrical discharge in his mind. Instead, he calmly thought about everything that had happened since the Double Moon Festival ball. Sister Tong was guarding the door. Jian Shuier was sitting on a chair by the window. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Su Lu, who was in a daze on the bed. She thought about the Tai family's bodyguard she had seen along the way, and felt that this seemingly ordinary young man was interesting. The successor of the Tai family really valued this guy called Su Lu. It seemed that Sister Tong's judgment was wrong. This young man called Su Lu was obviously not a member of the Tai family who had received much attention because he had saved Taizion's life in the gymnasium. Su Lu saw a flash of purple from the corner of his eyes and woke up with a start. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the girl by the window. Looking at the light yellow dress she was wearing, he couldn't help but think about the first person he saw when he woke up from the dark dream. She was wearing a white dress that shone under the sun. After informing the Tai family, Jian Shuier and Sister Tong never came to the hospital again. These days, Su Lu would occasionally think about that dreamlike day, but he did not expect to see the woman of his dreams again in real life. Being able to see her by chance was already dreamy enough. Su Lu had never thought about what would happen after that. In addition, so many strange things had happened in the hospital after that, he had almost forgotten that Jian Shuier had ever appeared. "Why are you here?" It was a boring opening, but Su Lu, who was slightly nervous and happy, could only say this sentence. Jian Shuier smiled sweetly, a trace of a cute smile flashing through her large mirror-like eyes. She replied in a clear and pleasant voice, "You are the first person I have saved in my life. Of course I have to come and see how your injuries are doing." This was a joke, and this sentence was not accurate at all. In the past few days, other than promoting her first album in the various states of Region S1, Jian Shuier spent the rest of her time at home in the capital. Other than occasionally seeing mecha promos on TV and thinking of the incomparably brave young man in the parking lot, she had actually gradually forgotten about Su Lu. After all, it was impossible for the two of them to have much interaction. Today, she had come to Jingzhou again, to the 1st Military Region's General Hospital, because of a troubling matter. The elders in her family had asked her to come to the 1st Military Region for a meal. Who would have thought that there would be a young man at the table? With her intelligence, of course, she understood the meaning of this meal, and very naturally the idea of leaving was born. The car drove along the streets of the 1st Military Region's residential area. She narrowed her eyes and looked at the sycamore trees beside the street, breathing in the fresh air. This Federation idol, the little lover in the hearts of hundreds of millions of people, suddenly felt that life was very meaningless. When she saw the entrance of the General Hospital, her thoughts moved slightly, and she thought of that interesting guy. Su Lu looked at Jian Shuier by the window. Looking at her short purple hair that was tied up in a ponytail, he was momentarily stunned. He did not know how to describe this girl's face. He felt that any more words would sound a bit tacky. Of course, this saying was pretty tacky in itself. He just felt that no matter if the girl not far from him was smiling, frowning, or spacing out, she was still so beautiful. She was so beautiful that she was not like a real person but like a picture. His heart moved slightly, and he forced himself to calm down. He thought of a possibility, and asked somewhat uneasily, "Miss Jian Shuier, can I ask you to do me a favor?" The bodyguards that Butler Jean arranged to stay at the General Hospital to take care of Su Li's daily life were all from the most famous security company in the Federation. They were the most professional bodyguards. Therefore, when Su Lu sat in a wheelchair under the forest to avoid the southern hemisphere's sunlight, they still silently stood in an inconspicuous corner under the sunlight, calmly observing everything that happened there. However, today's silence did not last long. One of the two bodyguards said softly, "Do you know what kind of person we are protecting this time?" The other person looked straight ahead, the corner of his lips slightly raised, and said, "Young master's friend. He's a very awesome guy. In the stadium's underground parking lot, this student killed 6 soldiers by himself," the first bodyguard said softly. "The combat power of the Linhai garrison force is just SOSO. But you can't do it." "I heard that he used to be a soldier," the bodyguard said. The bodyguard said, "But what I admire the most about him is, even Jian Shuier came to visit him." "Who exactly is this guy?" "I am an orphan. I have a friend who is also an orphan." He is in big trouble. And I have a good friend who has everything, including these bodyguards. Sulu said with a bitter smile. I want to help my friend who is in trouble, but another good friend of mine locked me up in this hospital out of concern for me. The good friend who has everything you are talking about is naturally Taizion. Jian Shuier stretched lazily behind the wheelchair, feeling extremely relaxed. She was certain that coming to the hospital today was the right decision. For some reason, being around this guy named Sulu always made her feel relaxed for no reason. It was as if there was an aura of absolute trust around him. You know Taizion? Sulu asked curiously. He then turned his head and said sincerely, Miss Jian, I have yet to repay you for saving my life, and now I have to ask for your help so unreasonably. I hope you won't be angry. I repeat, I did not save your life. Jian Shuier heard Sulu repeatedly say that she had saved his life. Her lower cheeks blushed slightly. She said, but I think Taizon's consideration must be reasonable. The way I see it, the key is whether or not you can really help your friend who is in trouble after you go back. If you are just impulsive and go back like a headless fly, then there is no need for you to help. It must be said that Jian Shuier's casual words pointed out the crux of the problem. Friends did need to help and trust each other. But if they were faced with an unknown future and couldn't do anything to help each other, it could only mean that the person involved was blinded by passion. Sitting in the wheelchair, Sulu was silent for a moment. His fingers subconsciously gripped his sunglasses and hat tightly. Jian Shuier always had sunglasses and hat with her when she went out. Now that Jian Shuier had condescended to push his wheelchair for him, these things were naturally placed in his hands. Suli's fingers slowly slid over the sunglasses and finally landed on his wrist. He gently stroked the smooth metal bracelet. Sulu made up his mind and said calmly, no matter what kind of trouble my friend is in, I think if I can meet him, I can definitely help him get rid of this kind of trouble. Jian Shuier smiled and looked at the young man with a crew cut on the wheelchair in front of her. Suddenly, she felt that the strong confidence in his words was a little. Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt that her mood today was very strange. Her eyes naturally lowered and landed on the bracelet on her wrist. A trace of nostalgia flashed in her clear eyes. What do you need me to do? I want to be discharged from the hospital and I need a plane ticket, and some money. Sulu touched the military trench coat under his wheelchair and scratched his head a little embarrassedly. I lost my bank card and I don't have a single cent on me. Taizion, that brat, took me into account. Jian Shuier cutely giggled. This was the first time she heard someone call the young master of the Tai family that brat. Chapter 140. In the speeding car, Sulu looked at Sister Tong, who was in the driver's seat. He couldn't help but look at Jian Shuier, who was beside him, and said, Thank you. But how do we get rid of those people? The process of leaving the 1st Military Region's General Hospital was extremely simple. It was so simple that even after Sulu got into Jian Shuier's car, he still felt a little confused. Jian Shuier, who was wearing a light yellow dress, pushed Suli's wheelchair out of the quiet entrance of the inpatient department. The Tai family staff in the hospital were all stunned for a moment. They didn't take any effective measures. To be honest, they probably didn't have the courage to do anything rude to the Federation's idol and the nation's most beautiful girl. The car drove on the streets of the 1st Military Region's residential area. The Tai family's bodyguard's car followed behind them. Sulu felt a little apologetic towards Taizion, but he was more worried about how to get rid of those people. If they kept following him, even if he took a plane back to Linhai, he would still be isolated from the outside world by the Tai family's wall of flesh. Jian Shuier had already put on her sunglasses. Most of her eye-catching purple hair was also covered by a cap. Although this teenage idol, who was not yet 18 years old, had to dress up when she went out, the large sunglasses did not give her the image of an iceberg-like celebrity who did not allow people to get close to her. Instead, when she wore them on her small and straight nose, she looked especially cute. Even now, sitting side by side with Jian Shuier still made Sulu feel nervous from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't help but think about how he was able to get to know Jian Shuier and get Jian Shuier to help him. But when he saw the cute girl next to him, he realized that Jian Shuier wasn't even 18 years old yet. The calmness and maturity that she showed before weren't what a young girl should be like. Don't worry. The sunglasses covered most of Jian Shui'er's face. Her rosy lips parted slightly. She smiled and said, "When it comes to how to get rid of being followed, I'm the expert in this area." Obviously, being suddenly involved in Su Li's escape made this young idol feel a trace of excitement. She was like a runaway girl, excitedly patting Su Li's shoulder. Half of Su Li's body suddenly stiffened. He noticed that Sister Tong, who was driving, had an unpleasant expression on her face. However, he misunderstood the feelings of Jian Shui'er and Sister Tong. He thought that Jian Shui'er claimed to be an expert because she had countless fans in the Federation who often followed her whereabouts, while Sister Tong was unhappy because Jian Shui'er patted her shoulder. In fact, elder Sister Tong's expression was because she thought of the time a few years ago when the young miss kept pulling her to escape from the family's surveillance. That was such a headache-inducing memory, but it was also quite interesting. The corners of Sister Tong's lips curled up into a smile. Half an hour later, the car arrived at the largest Fuqiao airport in the southwest area of Jingzhou. After parking the car in the underground parking lot, the three of them took the elevator and entered the spacious waiting hall. The Tai family bodyguards who had been following them also followed in groups of 2s and 3s. They stood not too far away from them, nervously and vigilantly watching everything around them. "According to your request, we booked 3 tickets. If you don't want people to find out how you're going back to Linhai, you can choose your own route." "I don't care about that," Sister Tong said coldly to Su Lu. "I just hope you don't do anything illegal." Jian Shui'er, who was wearing a cap and a normal jacket in the parking lot, looked like a refreshing teenager. However, the large sunglasses on her small nose made her look a bit out of place. The passengers walking around couldn't help but take a few more glances. Some of them wondered why this teenager gave off such a familiar feeling. However, no one associated this teenager with the national girl of the Federation. After all, no one would have thought that Jian Shui'er would actually appear in front of them. Su Lu, who was leaning on a steel cane that retracted automatically, took the tickets with both hands and sincerely expressed his thanks to Sister Tong. Then he turned around, bowed to Jian Shui'er, and said sincerely, "Miss Jian, I really don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. Helping a cripple escape is quite fun, isn't it?" Jian Shui'er was like a teenager. She pointed 2 fingers at the brim of her cap and slightly tilted her head. She was extremely cute and witty. "But I think right now you're having a headache. How can you get on the plane under the watchful eyes of the Tai family bodyguards? And how can you not let them know your itinerary?" Su Lu was a bit embarrassed and said, "Yeah." At this time, the 3 of them were at the entrance of the VIP passage. There were very few passengers passing through this passage. The Tai family bodyguards at the bookstore and the gangway were particularly obvious. There's a phrase called leaving during the chaos. Jian Shui'er looked at Su Lu and said with a smile, "I can create chaos. Whether or not you can leave depends on your ability." After saying this, Jian Shui'er took off the large sunglasses on her nose and took off her cap at the same time. Just like at home, she casually scratched her messy short purple hair. A chaos caused by Jian Shui'er's sudden appearance occurred at Fuqiao Airport without warning. Countless passengers excitedly rushed to the VIP passage. Lights began to flash non-stop, mixed with countless friendly greetings. The Tai family bodyguards were suddenly scattered by the waves of people, and found that they had lost sight of Su Lu. Su Li's reaction was very fast. The moment Jian Shui'er took off her sunglasses, he knew where the chaos she was talking about came from. And when Jian Shui'er's beautiful purple hair bloomed under her cap, he had quietly taken off his jacket under the cover of the surrounding crowd, and got on the express boarding vehicle provided by the airport. Time passed quickly. When he got on the flight to Shanghai, the Tai family bodyguards had time to report the disappearance of the target to their superiors. If he wants to leave, it shouldn't be easy to stop him. Plus, that lady is helping him. Taizion sighed softly and said to Butler Jean, "Inform Blackhawk Security Company that there's a mission in Linhai." Su Lu didn't fly directly to Linhai, because if he did, he might be surrounded by the Tai family bodyguards again as soon as he got off the plane. Naturally, there would be no way to contact Qinghai. He chose to fly to Shanghai. Shanghai was relatively close to Linhai, and it was also a relatively inconspicuous place. Sister Tong booked the economy class for him, but he didn't care because he was never rich. The problem was that he was still a patient, and his right leg was like a white cement stick. Sitting in the economy class seat was indeed a bit uncomfortable. Fortunately, the air stewardess on this flight was very kind and gave him a free upgrade. Thus, Sulu thanked her repeatedly. "I heard that you can make phone calls on flights now?" Sulu looked at the flight attendant squatting next to him and asked curiously. "Yes, sir. It's directly transferred through satellite. The cost is the same as normal calls, and you need to pay with a credit card," the flight attendant said sweetly. After hesitating for a moment, Sulu said very embarrassedly, "I was in a hurry to go back to Shangya, and I forgot to inform my friends at the airport about the arrival time of the flight. As you can see, there's something wrong with my leg. If no one picks me up, it will be a bit inconvenient, but I also forgot to take my phone." The flight attendant was slightly stunned. She smiled and said, "Do you want to borrow my phone?" "Yes, I'm really sorry for the trouble." The coat Sulu was wearing today was a coat provided by the hospital's Thai family staff. She couldn't tell what brand it was, but the material was good. Coupled with his sincere expression and thick eyebrows, he looked very refreshing. The flight attendant smiled slightly, thinking that this young man was really shy and cute. While thanking her profusely, Sulu took her phone and searched for the unknown number that Shi Qinghai was using. After thinking for a moment, he sent a short message. "I'm in the horse stance. I'll arrive at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Contact me, I have a plan." It had been more than a month, but it felt like a lifetime ago. During this time, Sulu had almost died once. Another big problem appeared in his mind. After returning from the south to Linhai, from the warm ocean climate to the harsh wind and snow environment, Sulu didn't think too much about his body and his brain. He just squinted his eyes, leaned on his metal crutches, and walked out of Shangya's airport. He got into a taxi. The car ride was silent. Sulu returned to the university town of Linhai, which he was familiar with. He was extremely cautious and didn't contact anyone, especially Zhang Xiaoming. It was impossible for him to go back to school. Instead, he went to the coffee shop on Famous Store Street alone. He asked for a cup of coffee and silently looked at the snow outside the window. He stared at the phone with a metallic luster on the green tablecloth. When he arrived at the coffee shop, he bought a few brand new SIM cards from the small shops that could be seen everywhere in the university town. At the same time, he sent a message to the number that Shi Qinghai was using. All that was left was to wait. The phone lay quietly on the tablecloth. Sulu stared at it silently, tightly holding the automatically retractable steel crutches in his hand. Gradually, his eyes moved to the alloy bracelet on his wrist. Just like what he said to Miss Jian Shuer before leaving the hospital, he firmly believed that after he found Shi Qinghai, he would be able to help him escape from the Federation's arrest warrant. At this moment the phone rang. Shi Qinghai's calm voice came from the other end. Shi Qinghai told him a house number. On the phone, Shi Qinghai wasn't so moved that he was speechless for a long time, nor did he angrily accuse him of being stupid. He just said a few words calmly. This was because he and Sulu were the same kind of people. When they knew that the other was in trouble, they would do anything to help. Since the other had come for him, there was no point in saying more. Sulu paid the bill and left. With some difficulty, he supported himself with the steel crutches. In the wind and snow of Linhai, he walked toward the streets deep in the city. Chapter 141. It was still a bar. Sulu pushed open the heavy glass door and smelled the familiar scent of pine nut wine and the nuts that went with the wine. He couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that even though he was wanted by the Federation, Shi Qinghai was still reluctant to drink. From this point of view, this guy seemed to lack some of the good habits of a professional agent. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning. The streets near the sea were shrouded in the wind and snow of late winter. The bar opened earlier than usual in order to protect the drunkards who craved for a sip of hot wine in the cold winter. But at this time, business was still average and the bar was relatively quiet. At the innermost table facing the entrance of the bar, there was a young man wearing a light gray windbreaker. His hair was neatly combed, and he was sipping his drink with his head slightly lowered. After Sulu entered the bar, he saw the man at first glance. He was startled and didn't immediately go forward to greet him. Instead, he leaned on his crutch and slowly walked to a table not adjacent to each other. He ordered a glass of white gold. The man in the gray windbreaker quickly finished his drink. He seemed to be thinking about something. He gently knocked on the table 3 times, left the money for the drink, and walked to the back of the bar in an extremely inconspicuous manner. There's probably a back door there, Sulu thought in his heart. He lowered his head and looked at the white gold in the glass. He couldn't help but frown. This kind of S1 specialty, pure and high-quality white wine, was still very harsh to the throat after being paired with honey melon juice. After drinking with Shi Qinghai countless times, he still found it difficult to adapt. After sitting for about 3 minutes, Sulu finally finished the transparent liquor in the glass. He painfully licked his lips, handed the money to the bartender, and asked for the location of the restroom. The bartender politely pointed the way, and Sulu walked to the back of the bar. It's a pity that you're not a spy. Shi Qinghai's eyes calmly looked straight ahead on the road. This pair of peach blossom eyes that had charmed countless young women seemed a little tired at this moment. It seemed that these days of escaping had brought unprecedented pressure to this excellent spy of the anti-government army. Sulu forced a smile. He lowered the hat on his head and tightened the synthetic fur scarf around his neck. At this time, the black off-road car was quietly driving on the streets of Linhai State. The heating in the car was not turned on, so it was a little cold. I got this car from Shangye. Now, I don't dare to refuel it casually, so I have to be a little more frugal, Shi Qinghai explained calmly with a cigarette in one hand and the steering wheel in the other. Sulu shrunk his body in the passenger seat. After a while, he said, "You just said that you are a spy planted by the anti-government forces in the government. The reason why your identity was exposed was because your superior was betrayed by a traitor within the anti-government army, which implicated you. The most important question is, the Federation government is now suspecting you of being the source of intelligence for the Linhai State Gymnasium assassination." Sulu exhaled a puff of smoke into his hand and looked at the road ahead in confusion. "It's too messy. It's really messy." Shi Qinghai stubbed out the cigarette and looked straight at the snowy road ahead. He said, "My teacher's superior died too quickly, so I didn't find out who the traitor in the organization was. I've been investigating these days and vaguely guessed something, but unfortunately, I don't have any evidence." "Why do you want me to be careful of Zhang Xiaoming?" Sulu stared at his side profile and asked. "The Federation Investigation Bureau has been investigating how Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked." Shi Qinghai's face showed a trace of a mocking smile. "After investigating so much, they could only find you. The Tai family seems to have too much confidence in their staff. Since Tai Ziyuan's whereabouts were leaked by you, you should know very well who you told when you were going to the concert the next day. The night before the New Year, I was drinking with you. You should have met with Zhang Xiaoming before that." Shi Qinghai frowned slightly. "I'm sure that I didn't tell anyone about this. Then, why was the National Defense Department's Eagle Faction's assassination attempt on the young master of the Tai family so timely and so accurate? There's only one explanation. The information was leaked by Zhang Xiaoming. I know she's a spy." Suli's head was lowered. His right hand gently stroked his injured leg, which was a little painful from the cold. It was cold to the touch. It was as firm and cold as cement. "She serves Senator Macklin." The black touring car smoothly stopped on the side of the road, next to the Rose River. Shi Qinghai turned his head and looked at Sulu beside him. He said in a serious tone, "You know that she's a spy. Don't you have any other thoughts?" "What thoughts can I have?" Sulu leaned against the seat of the car. His eyes were calm as he looked ahead. He said in a lonely voice, "I only have 3 friends. 2 of them are spies and 1 of them is a big shot. I'm a little numb to this kind of thing." He suddenly turned his head and stared into Shi Qinghai's eyes. He said very angrily, "Do I have a special trait that attracts spies?" Shi Qinghai smiled. He knew what he wanted to ask. He shrugged and said, "When I first met you, I didn't know that you were so lucky to know Taiyan. I believe that Zhang Xiaoming is the same. The reason why both of us became friends with you is probably because you always have a trustworthy temperament." "Don't say such ridiculous things." Sulu shook his head sadly. "Why do you want me to be careful of her?" "Zhang Xiaoming is just a very unprofessional girl," Shi Qinghai said. The problem is that the people she serves are very professional people. Those people can use such an unprofessional girl to get what they want. My current situation is caused by them. And I'm afraid that you're also a thorn in their side. You think that Senator Medellin is a traitor in the anti-government army? Sulu looked at Shi Qinghai in surprise. Shi Qinghai smiled. His smile was full of uncertainty and self-mockery. Didn't you see the recent news? It seems that this senator has already made connections with some forces in the Federation. Of course, no one will believe this inference of mine. Even the leader of Nanshui from Green Dragon Mountain, and the citizens of the 4 states won't believe it. He was one of the most successful spies in the anti-government army. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. When he had first thrown himself into this business, how could he have thought that he would be exposed in such a way? It seemed that it had been the same since ancient times. The enemy was always the cruelest inside. What are you going to do next? Go back to S2 directly to Green Dragon Mountain? Sulu looked at Shi Qinghai worriedly and asked softly, since you've already been exposed, there's no way you can stay in the Federation anymore. His whole family had died tragically because of the Federation's government's numbness. His teacher and boss had died under that white beam of light because of the Federation's shady dealings. His friends had been arrested and imprisoned by the government under false pretenses. He didn't know where they were now. Sulu didn't have a good impression of the government. So whether it was Zhang Xiaoming's true identity or Shi Qinghai's true identity, he wasn't afraid or conflicted at all. He was just shocked. Shi Qinghai looked at him. Ever since the day the HTD director fell from the building and died tragically in front of him, he had been on the run. The Federation Investigation Bureau had been secretly looking for him. The past few days of escaping had been very exciting, but he didn't want to recall it at all. After arriving in Xiangya, he had hidden for more than 10 days. He was supposed to take advantage of the relaxation of the secret search and go directly to Harbor City to find the last contact left for him by the organization. However, just before he left, Shi Qinghai used the backdoor he had left in the Federation Investigation Bureau's intranet to hack into the other party's network. When he was about to look for some information, he unexpectedly found that someone was investigating Sulu. What made him even more alarmed was that the department investigating Sulu had a very high level of confidentiality. They directly bypassed the field office's authorization and quietly read all the information about Sulu and Linhai over the past year. If Shi Qinghai hadn't left a cute little program in the Linhai office's intranet, then no one in the Federation Investigation Bureau, including him, would have known that someone was investigating Sulu. It was also because of this reason that Shi Qinghai took the risk to contact Sulu. While on the run, any unnecessary contact or meeting could expose him to the government, but he still did it. There was no doubt that this choice required great courage. Just like how Sulu didn't hesitate to return to Linhai after he found out about what happened to him. The friendship between 2 drinking buddies wasn't just about the wine. My single contact is dead. Now it's very difficult for me to get in touch with the anti-government army in Green Dragon Mountain. Shi Qinghai said in a low voice, with my ability, as long as the Bureau of Proclamation doesn't care, the Federation's government department will have a hard time catching me. The key is, what are you going to do now? You said someone is investigating me? What's there to investigate? Suli's eyebrows flew up again like flying knives as he asked in shock. The confidence in Shi Qinghai's words gave him great comfort. It seemed that he didn't need to change Mr. Shi's chip. But then Shi Qinghai's serious warning made Sulu think of a lot of terrible things. There weren't many government departments that could bypass the Investigation Bureau's authority, but it was obvious that the first charter could easily do this. I just wanted to remind you, but I didn't expect you to come back. Shi Qinghai stared at his face and said, don't underestimate Taiyuan's power, and don't refuse his help for the sake of face. If there is a problem in the future, you have to contact him first. Sulu was silent, but his heart was already frozen by the ice and snow outside the car window. If it was really the omnipotent central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation that had noticed him, then even the Tai family couldn't do anything to help. At this moment, Shi Qinghai, who had been using the corner of his eye to look at the rear-view screen, suddenly narrowed his eyes and stepped on the gas pedal to the maximum. The black car's wheels rolled up the ice and snow, and suddenly rushed forward. Shi Qinghai stared at the road calmly, and said to Su Lu, who was next to him, "If you don't want that leg to be broken, put on your seatbelt." "Motherfucker! Who's been watching me all this time?" Shi Qinghai cursed angrily as he looked at the wide street behind him through the rear-view screen. There were a few black cars that were chasing him at high speed. Those black cars were very familiar. They were the official cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau. Chapter 142. The Bureau of Proclamation only grants Level 5 access for one day. Inside the high-speed Federation Investigation Bureau car, a middle-aged official stared at the fleeing car with hawk-like eyes. The official pressed on his headset and listened carefully for a while. Then he turned to the small holographic screen on his wrist and issued an order to his subordinates: "Find out who your target is. He is a vicious terrorist. He is an outstanding soldier who graduated from a military academy. He knows the arrest process of the Investigation Bureau better than you do. So don't be arrogant. Before entering the city, you must stop the car in front. If the other party resists, you are allowed to open fire." After issuing the order, the middle-aged official cursed angrily. "Those motherfuckers of the Bureau of Proclamation, they only gave me 1 day of access, and it's only level 5. Don't they know how dangerous that kid's surname sure is?" Su Li's face was a little pale. The scenery outside the car window was moving backward at a terrifying speed. The automatic heating and de-icing system of the highway had already been turned on. Otherwise, if they were moving at this speed on ice and snow, their black off-road vehicle would have flipped over and died before the cars behind them could catch up. Shi Qinghai's face didn't have the slightest trace of nervousness except for the slight worry in his eyes. He licked his dry lips lightly, but he seemed a little excited. "Do you know how to drive?" He stared at the high-speed cars on the rearview screen. "No." Su Lu answered quickly without a trace of hesitation. He knew that in such a tense moment, any hesitation could lead to serious consequences. "Do you dare to drive?" "Yes." This question and answer was wonderful and absurd. Probably only Su Lu and Shi Qinghai could come up with something like this. Su Lu didn't know why Shi Qinghai handed over the control of the car to him, but he could imagine that Shi Qinghai must need to free up his hands to deal with the black cars that were getting closer and closer. Shi Qinghai pulled on a rope that had been hanging beside the sun visor. With a loud crash, something in the back of the black off-road vehicle fell out. A large pile of rusty metal components fell on the road of Linhai State. The speed of these components made them heavy and dangerous as they flew everywhere on the road. The car at the front of the black motorcade was hit by an iron thallium that had just bounced off the ground. With a strange sound of metal cracking, the car bounced up from the ground and then rushed diagonally off the road, making a loud noise. The pursuing motorcade was hindered by these things on the road. After paying a heavy price of one car, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's car pulled away from them. "Open fire." The official's angry voice came from the convoy. The sharp sound of bullets whistling through the air suddenly cut across the road, startling countless pedestrians and birds in the forest. Taking advantage of this time, Shi Qinghai switched seats with Su Lu. He took out a long gun from the back seat and placed it at the back of the car. After a few shattering sounds, the glass of the back of the car was completely shattered. He narrowed his eyes and aimed at the pursuing cars. Calmly, even somewhat coldly, he began to pull the trigger. With a muffled bang, Shi Qinghai's shoulder shook. The front wheel of the car he had aimed at suddenly exploded. At high speed, the car lost control and crashed into the side of the road. The cold wind poured into the car, making it incomparably cold. Su Lu hid his body completely under the seat, avoiding the flying bullets. Although he had never driven a car before, when he was in Donglin, he had once followed Uncle Fengyu to repair cars. He was very familiar with the driving system of a car. Moreover, for someone who could operate a mecha, driving a car was like playing with a toy. However, this toy was very dangerous. Su Lu focused all his attention on controlling the steering wheel and gears, avoiding the cars in front of him that had stopped because of the gunfight. He tried to increase the speed of the car as much as possible, trying to increase the distance between him and the pursuing cars behind. This was his first time driving a car, but his keen eyes and incomparably strong hand-eye coordination allowed him to control the car smoothly. He looked more like a racer. No, Su Li's racer driving was even crazier. Because there was a U-shaped turn ahead, he did not seem to have any intention of letting go of the accelerator to slow down. In the instant before the turn, his left foot stomped hard on the accelerator and his right hand pulled hard on the handbrake, causing this civilian black off-road vehicle to drift dangerously on the slippery surface of the road. Just as it was about to hit the cliff at the turn, he straightened the car and continued to move forward fiercely. From the moment they were preparing to enter the turn to the moment they exited the turn, Su Lu did not let go of the accelerator. The tachometer was maintained at 4,500 RPM. Cold sweat had already covered his forehead. The bullets that hit the car from time to time and the strong wind that rushed in through the cracks made Su Lu feel unprecedentedly nervous and excited. Amidst the sound of the bullets, he roared loudly at Shi Qinghai behind him, "Throw down more of those things that are blocking the road, or else we won't be able to shake them off." Shi Qinghai had been calmly maintaining his aiming posture. He rarely pulled the trigger, but every time he pulled the trigger, the pursuing cars of the Federation Investigation Bureau would be reduced by one car. Hearing Su Li's roar, he roared loudly in the wind, "Just now it was like I was throwing an auxiliary fuel tank. I went to the junkyard last night. How much did you think it could hold? Bastard! It seems that we are going to die here today." Su Lu shouted loudly while nervously watching the situation on the road. His eyes and his hands were in perfect harmony at this moment. Everything he saw was organized into his mind in an extremely organized manner. Then, through the special channels in his body, the corresponding measures were transmitted to his three limbs. All the controls, without any unnecessary movements, without any hesitation, were extremely smooth, except for the foot that had been stepping on the accelerator all the time. Just like Su Lu, it was firm, unwavering, and determined not to move away. It was a perfect driving, a heroic driving, and a crazy driving. Although Shi Qinghai did not turn around, he knew how fast the car was going at this time. His face was slightly pale and he shouted loudly, "Break into the city in front. In 3 minutes, the Investigation Bureau will set up the first line of interception." Su Li's face was also extremely pale. Looking at the countless scenes that were retreating at high speed, he felt that he had returned to that extremely terrifying black dream. He clenched his teeth, raised his right hand, and forcefully turned the steering wheel with his left hand. He secretly prayed that the car would not overturn. When the Federation Investigation Bureau's team that was secretly pursuing Shi Qinghai arrived at the 7th toll station of Linhai, the number of cars had increased from 9 to 5. The middle-aged official with a particularly gloomy face got out of the car and looked at the broken railing in front of him. He looked back at his subordinates behind him and squeezed out a voice from between his teeth. "Contact the Bureau of Proclamation. Immediately locate where they are now. Contact the Traffic Control Bureau. Block the traffic in this area. At the same time, track the black off-road vehicle. Inform the team to be ready to assemble at any time." There was only debris on the ground and the stunned staff in the toll station. There was no trace of the black off-road vehicle. The officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau were very clear that the target they were chasing this time was an extremely excellent spy. Moreover, the other party had worked in the Investigation Bureau for many years and was very familiar with the internal communications and procedures of the Investigation Bureau. Therefore, before this operation, this batch of Investigation Bureau's team deliberately chose an unusual channel. Even if the heavy rifle that stretched out from the civilian off-road vehicle ruthlessly and coldly overturned several cars, the officials of the Federation Investigation Bureau still did not have the slightest intention to retreat. This was because if Shi Qinghai did not have this ability, he would not have been able to graduate from the first military academy as the top student. Moreover, he would not have been so favored in the Investigation Bureau. They were fully prepared for the upcoming difficulties and firmly believed that with the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location, they would definitely be able to catch the other party. But the problem was the person driving the off-road vehicle. The middle-aged official's eyes were spitting fire. Looking at the seemingly endless road in front of him, he quickly issued orders to close the net one by one. But in his heart he was thinking, was that a madman? Even if it was a Special Forces soldier who had received the most rigorous training, it was impossible to drive a civilian off-road vehicle at such a crazy speed. Thinking of the off-road vehicle that roared like a black ghost, The middle-aged official's heart was abnormally heavy. The other party did not look like he was running for his life at all, but more like he was giving up his life. Any normal person would subconsciously slow down at such a speed. This was an instinct. But that driver did not seem to have the word fear in his instincts. Forcefully changing gears, the handbrake was on, and the left foot stomped hard. The black civilian off-road vehicle that had been sliding at a high speed for 200 meters in neutral still maintained its high speed. Under the collective cooperation of the three braking methods, it slammed into the garage door with a loud bang. Shi Qinghai carried his backpack and walked out of the car with a pale face. He almost vomited. He was a well-trained professional. Previously, when faced with a hail of bullets, he would not be so frightened. But sitting in Su Li's car, he felt scared. "I don't want you to drive anymore." Shi Qinghai stared painfully at Su Lu in the driver's seat. "I would rather be taken back and tortured by the Bureau of Investigation than risk my life with you." Su Li's face was also abnormally pale. His outstretched hands trembled slightly in the air, and he was unable to leave the seat. He glanced at Shi Qinghai and said in a trembling voice, "Help me, I can't get out." Shi Qinghai thought that Su Lu had finally been unable to withstand the fear and tension after experiencing the crazy racing and escape. He was so scared that he couldn't move. He opened the car door and unfastened the seatbelt that bound Su Li's body. He wanted to carry him out, but found that he could not move. He stared at Su Li's right foot, which was wrapped into a white cement pillar. In silence, his face began to become extremely colorful. Chapter 143. If the official from the Federation Investigation Bureau knew that the answer that puzzled him was actually just a small accident, he would definitely want to vomit blood and die. Su Li's right leg, which was sealed with medical plaster, played an absolutely important role in this escape. If it wasn't stuck between the seat and the gas pedal, turning into a steering wheel lock that was often seen in action movies, or some other hard object that was used to push the gas pedal, since it was his first time driving a car, no matter how talented he was when it came to machinery, he wouldn't have been able to turn the civilian off-road vehicle into a crazy monster that cared about speed more than life. It would have been impossible for him to kill his way out of the encirclement of the FBI. Humans were naturally afraid of death. No one dared to step on the accelerator all the way and use the steering wheel and gear to cause trouble. The problem was that Su Li's right leg that stepped on the accelerator was no longer under his control. It was like a concrete pillar. A cunning rabbit had at least 3 nests for escape. Shi Qinghai, who had been a spy in the Federation Investigation Bureau for so long, was naturally no exception. At this time, the two of them were already far away from the civilian off-road vehicle that saved their lives and almost killed them. They disguised themselves as 2 ordinary Federation office workers and came to a small building on a street in Linhai. In a dark room, the Investigation Bureau changed the channel. Shi Qinghai carefully fiddled with the small receiver. Fortunately, they didn't have time to clean up the things I hid in the intranet. Su Lu was half lying on a bed. His face was unhealthily pale. After all, he was seriously injured in the Linhai gymnasium, and today he suffered both physical and mental torture. He felt like he couldn't bear it anymore, especially his stomach, which was very hungry. "If the government people didn't follow me here, then how did they know where you were?" Su Lu gently rubbed his waist and narrowed his eyes at Shi Qinghai. "That's why I had to leave immediately. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have met you this morning." A trace of apology flashed across Shi Qinghai's beautiful face. He smiled bitterly and said, "I thought that my colleagues in the Bureau of Proclamation wouldn't be able to find any trace of me. I didn't expect that those who wanted me dead would apply for the authority of the Bureau of Proclamation." "Are you sure that the Bureau of Proclamation is helping the hunters locate them?" Su Li's expression turned a little ugly. Ever since he had escaped from the Donglin region, the word he hated the most was the word charter. Just like what Uncle Feng Yu had lamented beside the mine pit back then, the law he hated the most in his life, other than the Wildlife Protection Act, was the first charter. Su Lu had been hunted down by the Bureau of Proclamation before, so he felt that the current situation was a little strange. He looked at Shi Qinghai and said, "According to the charter I checked online, the Bureau of Proclamation shouldn't care about the actions of the anti-government forces. They should just monitor them according to the regulations. After thinking for a while, he said seriously, and if the Bureau of Proclamation is really involved in this hunt, I don't think we'll have time to sit here and chat. When they were escaping from Donglin, the Special Forces only needed 4 minutes and 12 seconds to accurately locate Feng Yu and Su Lu. At this time, the two of them were on the same planet as the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation, so the transmission of information could be considered to be at the same time. So Su Lu understood why no one had broken into the house after so much time had passed. In fact, this was just because he didn't understand that the hunt that happened to him and his uncle was a rare first-order incident in the entire Federation. It required the use of the entire Federation's electronic surveillance network and a lot of resources to achieve real-time location. And today, Shi Qinghai and his uncle were facing only the authority of the Fifth Order. I don't know why the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, but I believe that my feeling is right. Otherwise, those guys wouldn't have been able to find me. Shi Qinghai's beautiful eyebrows revealed a hint of despair. He forced a smile and said, "As for why no one has broken into the house at this time, I don't know. After all, I've never been hunted down by the entire Federation." Su Lu wanted to say that he had been hunted down before. Looking at the faint sadness between Shi Qinghai's eyebrows, he couldn't help but say, "Even if the Bureau of Proclamation is involved, it's not a big deal. I have a way to let you escape." Shi Qinghai didn't understand this sentence. Even if he had heard it, he would have thought that Su Lu was comforting him. The world was used to the omnipresence of the First Charter. Even a professional like Shi Qinghai, who was good at hiding his powerful abilities under a romantic appearance, would not have the ambition to escape under the brilliance of the Bureau of Proclamation. He just didn't understand why the Bureau of Proclamation was involved in the Federation Investigation Bureau's search for anti-government military spies. The holographic screen of the wristwatch was playing the news. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai watched quietly, their faces gradually becoming dignified. The news was describing the chase and gunfight on the Linhai Ring Highway. At the same time, the spokesperson of the police system was interviewed by the television station and confirmed that the criminal being hunted down by the Federation Investigation Bureau, and the police was one of the main suspects in the fire at the Jingzhou Electric Power Export Company yesterday. The authorities had classified this suspect as a terrorist. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai looked at each other and saw the complicated emotions in each other's eyes. "Were you in Jingzhou yesterday?" "I was in Fart Prefecture yesterday." At this point, the situation was clear. The relevant departments of the Federation government, in order to end the shockwave brought to the government by the Linhai Gymnasium assassination as soon as possible, the traitor of the anti-government army and some other forces, in order to cover up some truth, found a way to work together at this moment. They perfectly cooperated with each other and hid the real crime of hunting down Shi Qinghai. In the name of a terrorist, they obtained the authority and cooperation of the Bureau of Proclamation. They had to catch Shi Qinghai or kill Shi Qinghai. The government can be so shameless. Su Lu sighed with emotion. He immediately thought of Uncle Feng Yu's comments on the First Charter many years ago. Yes, even if the central computer had the right starting point, no matter how powerful it was, and no matter how detailed the legal constraints of the charter were, it was still a machine in the hands of human beings. If the human who controlled it had a problem, it would naturally have a problem. The government has always been so shameless, but I didn't expect that such a big lineup was actually because of me. I feel very honored. Shi Qinghai was carefully listening to the movements in the earpiece while assembling the gun. Suddenly, he frowned and said, "They changed the channel. I didn't notice that there was something wrong with the conversation in the past few minutes. Maybe they have already arrived." After saying this, Shi Qinghai pulled out an ultra-thin holographic screen from beside him, as if he was performing a magic trick. Some dark red light spots appeared on the holographic screen. Su Guang looked at this scene in a daze. He thought to himself, as expected of an agent, he always has such a high-tech device around him. The ultra-thin holographic screen seemed to be some kind of detection device, but Su Lu had never seen it before. Looking at the units on the screen, it should cover a distance of 500 meters around the building. When Shi Qinghai chose this escape point, he should have installed a lot of surveillance equipment outside. They have already arrived, but there seems to be some other people. Shi Qinghai looked at the moving light spots on the holographic screen. He scratched his hair. making his meticulously oiled hair become messy as usual. He smiled and said, "I'm leaving, you go hide in the basement." "I'm leaving, not the other way around." The Federation Investigation Bureau only used 20 minutes to find Shi Qinghai's most secret hiding place. This outstanding professional, under the glory of the First Charter, really couldn't muster up too much courage. He smiled at Su Lu and said, "You are already stupid enough to come back to Lin Hai, but I don't think you are stupid enough to follow me to the Dead Sea." "I'm not stupid." Su Lu lowered his head, put the original number card that the staff of the Tai family gave him back into his phone, and calmly replied, "Although I haven't received the kind of professional training that you guys have, I have more experience than anyone in the Federation in dealing with the First Charter." After saying this, Su Lu raised his left hand and aimed the metal bracelet on his wrist at the back of Shi Qinghai's neck. However, in the next moment, Shi Qinghai's figure had already disappeared from the room. He jumped down from the balcony, leaving only Su Lu, who had crutches beside him and couldn't move freely. "It seems that you really don't have much confidence in me." Su Lu smiled, leaned on the metal crutches, and jumped down from the balcony after him. Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu, who had landed beside him dumbfounded. He tilted his head and praised, "First, you are really good, even a cripple can jump off a building. Second, you are really not afraid of death. But how am I going to escape with a cripple like you?" Su Lu smiled. At this time he really didn't have the mood to bicker with him, nor did he have the time to express his gratitude. If the Bureau of Proclamation was tracking Shi Qinghai's chip, then after he left, he would naturally be safe in the basement. The Federation Bureau of Investigation wants to arrest you, but maybe there are also people who want to kill you. Su Lu thought back to the time when he was in Donglin, when the federal military launched an attack on the repair shop without warning. His heart felt heavy. They carefully walked through 2 streets. At the exit, the 2 of them were interrogated. They were wearing black suits and milky white headphones, and they couldn't wait to announce to the whole world that they were secret agents. "If you can avoid killing people, then don't kill people. I don't want you to really become a terrorist." Su Lu pulled down his cap, covering most of his face, and put the metal crutches back into the cylinder. He clung onto Shi Qinghai's shoulder, pretending to be a drunk man, and walked toward the intersection where the secret agents were standing. "It's only 12 o'clock. Isn't it a little too early to be drunk?" Shi Qinghai lowered his head slightly and whispered in his ear, "Besides, I have so many guns on my back, even a fool can see it." "That's your problem. Of all the things to learn, you just had to learn from the gorillas in the mountains. Don't forget, I was originally a member of the gorillas, but that cap of yours is quite unique. Where did you buy it?" "Jian Shuer gave it to you." "Who?" "Jian Shuer. You didn't hear wrong, but this is a very long story." He walked in front of the secret agents of the Federation Bureau of Investigation, who were squinting their eyes and vigilantly watching the pedestrians. Su Lu and Shi Qinghai's meaningless conversation came to an abrupt end, and the 2 of them tacitly separated at the same time. Su Li's retractable crutches suddenly popped out and hit one of the secret agents in the middle of his forehead. At the same time, he fell in that direction and hit the back of the secret agent's head with the tip of his elbow in a strange posture. Chapter 144. In a small airport on the outskirts of Lin Hai, 3 helicopters painted in black were ready to take off. The strong wind blew the thin snow on the ground, making it flutter like catkins on the banks of the Rose River in early spring. However, the fully armed people next to the helicopters didn't have the time to be sad. Xuan, the director of the Black Eagle Security Company, stared coldly at the subordinates rushing from behind. He looked down at the time on his watch and said loudly, "The cell phone signal has been located. The target is trying to escape from Lin Hai through the 3 blockades set by the Federation Investigation Bureau. According to the analysis, the target can only break through 2 blockades at most. Our mission is to intercept the target before the 3rd blockade." Xuan had been retired from the military for 6 years, but he had been performing paramilitary tasks in the Black Eagle Security Company. His words were still as concise and powerful as a military officer. "Last time in the gymnasium you lost all your face. This time you must earn it back." Xuan stared into his subordinate's eyes and said fiercely. He added a sentence to himself in his heart, especially in front of the young master's friend. If it wasn't for that person last time, perhaps he would have already committed suicide by swallowing a gun. Change equipment. Following the order, Black Eagle, one of the most powerful security companies in the Federation, began to change equipment. A box was opened and all kinds of spray equipment were moved over. The combatants of the security company wore bulletproof vests with the police logo, and the 3 black helicopters were quickly sprayed with the logo of Lin Hai Police Headquarters. "Let's go," Xuan ordered, stepped on the scattered snow and boarded the helicopter. The dark underground parking lot brought a strong sense of uneasiness to Su Lu. He sat in the passenger seat of the small truck, looking at the continuous countdown on the screen in his hand, and said in a hoarse voice, 15 minutes until the next location. After escaping from the small building, the two of them had been intercepted several times by the Federation Investigation Bureau. Through the calculation of time and Shi Qinghai's understanding of the Investigation Bureau's execution power, Su Lu roughly figured out the time needed for each location. The small truck was hit by a sniper rifle earlier and almost capsized. The exploded metal pieces flew everywhere, and the situation was very dangerous. At this time, Shi Qinghai got out of the sedan beside the truck and nodded at Su Lu, indicating that it was done. "It's all right." Su Lu exhaled and wiped away the trace of blood on the corner of his eyebrows. He jumped out of the truck with the help of his metal crutches and got into the car with the new owner. He said with lingering fear, "It should only be a sequence 5. Otherwise we would have died long ago." Shi Qinghai lit a cigarette. His handsome face was full of exhaustion. He had been on the run for less than an hour, but he was already mentally and physically exhausted. It was even more painful than running for the past month. No matter where he hid, it wouldn't be long before the electronic surveillance network that covered the entire Federation would receive the data from the chip on the back of his neck and feed back his position to the Federation's Investigation Bureau that was in charge of pursuing him. There was really no hope for this kind of escape. "You know a lot." Shi Qinghai looked at Su Lu and said very seriously, "You surprised me. If you had believed in my ability to pick locks, the time it took to get rid of that sedan could have been much faster." Su Lu said, "In the end, I don't know you and you don't know me well enough. If you really want to live, you have to believe me. I don't have the time to listen to your nonsense." Shi Qinghai obviously didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could remove the chip on the back of his neck. Even if an extremely sophisticated surgery could do this, how could he survive in the Federation without the chip? He smiled and said to Su Lu, "Although we don't know each other's secrets, at least we're in a life and death situation right now." He suddenly frowned and said in disgust, "But I think this is very shameful. Why do you want to die with me? I also think it's very strange. Why did you come back to Lin Hai to see me when you had clearly escaped?" Su Lu said, "That's because you knew someone was investigating me, so you wanted to warn me. Speaking of which, it's really quite boring. No wonder Taizion kept trying to stop me from coming back. Even if I didn't come back, I would have been caught by the Federation in the end, unless I had the ability to escape to the Great Triangle." Shi Qinghai took a deep drag on his cigarette. He had already thrown away the empty pack. He glanced at Su Lu and handed the remaining half of the cigarette to him. "But you're different. If you were still lying in the general hospital, these things wouldn't have a damn thing to do with you." Su Lu took the half of the cigarette and took a deep drag. Then he found that the mouth of the cigarette was wet and couldn't help but feel a little disgusted. "I have countless women and colleagues in my life, but the ones who really care about me are probably that teacher of mine and you." Shi Qinghai's smile was a little dim. "Teacher is already dead. I was hoping that you could survive. After I died, at least there would be someone to clean my grave for me, and someone to arrange a bouquet of flowers for me on the anniversary of my death. I also have very few friends, so I can't lose any of them." Su Lu used 2 fingers to clamp the already short cigarette butt and took a deep drag. He almost choked and coughed. "As for why I came, you don't believe me. Taizion doesn't believe me. I think Jian Shuer, who helped me escape, also doesn't believe that I can really help you." Su Lu did have the ability to help Shi Qinghai escape from the Bureau of Proclamation. This was the biggest secret in his life, and it was hidden in the metal bracelet on his wrist. When his friend was in a desperate situation, Su Lu certainly wouldn't be stingy with sharing this secret. It was just that he didn't have the opportunity to change Shi Qinghai's ID chip when they were in the small building. Later on, they were in a hurry to escape, so he really didn't have the time. Sulu had changed his ID chip before, so he knew that the intense pain, as if the electric current was passing through the body, was really unbearable. It was very likely that the person involved would fall into a coma. In fact, he had been unconscious for several hours that rainy night. If Shi Qinghai had fallen into a coma at this time, and his leg was lame, he really didn't have the confidence to escape from the government's arrest. So he changed the SIM card back to the original one and waited silently and nervously. You really know Jian Shuer? Shi Qinghai subconsciously glanced at the baseball cap on Su Li's head. Only then did he notice that this baseball cap was indeed a little too small and cute. He shrugged in disbelief. Or is this the coldest joke I'm going to tell before I die? We'll talk about that later. I just want to explain once why I want to go back to Lin Hai, and why I want to help you. Su Lu threw the cigarette butt out of the window. His nose twitched slightly, and he said with a calm face, from the assassination attempt on Taizion in the gymnasium, to the death of your superior, to you being hunted down, everything was caused by Zhang Xiaoming. Whether she did it intentionally or not, it's still her responsibility. Zhang Xiaoming is my woman. She made a mistake, so I want to help her solve it, said Su Lu. Shi Qinghai tilted his head and looked at him. After a while he said, I just realized today that you're like a civil rights hero who lived in the early days of the constitutional era, the embodiment of justice. The problem is that it's disgusting. You're just a male animal whose cerebral cortex has been affected by the concentration of alcohol. Hearing the profanity, Su Lu smiled. He thought to himself that his cerebral cortex was indeed abnormal. He stared at the hologram on Shi Qinghai's wrist and began to count down. 30 seconds left. Shi Qinghai lightly stepped on the accelerator and stared intently at the exit of the underground parking lot. He pointed at a direction on the hologram and said, confirm whether this road is clear or not. Su Lu looked at the map on the hologram and said, no problem. The stolen car found a road in the middle of several streets and alleys. It turned into a cloud of dust and broke through the roadblocks set up by the police. Once again, it rushed into the streets of Linhai City. Countless police cars and black station wagons, which were very characteristic of the Federation Investigation Bureau, began to chase after the car. The sirens were long and loud. At this time, only the traffic monitoring system of the police headquarters in Linhai City was enough to ensure the success of the chase. They no longer needed the help of the Bureau of Proclamation's location. This is a slow suicide. Shi Qinghai suddenly turned the steering wheel and avoided a truck in front of him. He said loudly, as a professional, I shouldn't listen to you and drive away. I can find a random house and point a gun at a beautiful woman as a hostage. I can hide for half a month. Su Lu replied, you forgot the location of the Bureau of Proclamation. Shi Qinghai's face changed slightly. He cursed loudly, fuck the first charter. On the parallel streets, police cars with flashing lights had begun to appear. From time to time, fierce figures could be seen from the corners of the streets. Shi Qinghai took a deep breath and focused on the front. He said, I'm ready to fight and then die. If you can't create any more miracles, you can get out of here. I'm also waiting for a miracle. Su Lu held the phone tightly. Sweat gradually seeped out. At this time the phone rang. It showed a strange number. I'm Su Lu. My surname is Xue. How can I help you? Su Lu smiled. He turned his head and told Shi Qinghai the coordinates. The two quickly found the street indicated by the coordinates on the hologram map. Shi Qinghai drove the car and made a forced turn. He barely got rid of the two police cars that were closest to him and sped toward the street. This was a long straight street with no forks. At the end of the street there was a faint buzzing sound. The air seemed to be vibrated by something. 3 black, matte helicopters appeared at the end of the road. At the edge of the helicopters' cabins, heavily armed policemen vigilantly scanned the street below. They aimed the black rotary barrels in their hands at the whole street. The miniature Darling gun barrels could turn a car into a hornet's nest with just one sweep. The rotary barrels with a metallic luster were still so gloomy and cold under the noon sun. Police. Shi Qinghai's eyes suddenly became very calm. He stared at the horrible existence that suddenly appeared above the street. Under such powerful firepower, he was too lazy to make any evasive movements.